Welcome to the sleepy Geographer, where the world unfolds gently, like waves lapping against distant shores. Tonight, we embark on a journey across the vast blue expanse that covers more than 70% of our planet, exploring not just the seas themselves, but the deep, ancient relationship between humanity and these endless waters. Before we set sail on this contemplative voyage, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Perhaps you're near the ocean yourself, close enough to hear the rhythmic whisper of waves against sand. Maybe you're far inland, dreaming of salt air and horizon lines. Or perhaps you're somewhere in between, where rivers carry the promise of the sea. Wherever you are, I hope you'll find comfort in this gentle exploration of how the seas have shaped us and how we have learned to shape our relationship with them. If these quiet journeys bring you peace, I'd be grateful if you could tap the like button and subscribe. To those who are already part of this calm community, thank you. You are the steady tide that keeps this channel flowing, I should mention. I do hope this video doesn't prove so interesting that it keeps you awake. But if it does, at least you'll drift into tomorrow with new understanding of humanity's oldest partnership, our bond with the boundless sea. The ocean calls to something deep within us, a memory perhaps of our earliest origins, or simply the recognition that we are, all of us, made mostly of water. It's drawn always back to water. So let us begin this evening's voyage, not across the surface of the seas, but through the depths of human experience with these vast waters that surround us. We'll explore how the ocean has been highway and barrier, provider and destroyer, inspiration and terror. How it has carried our ancestors to new lands and carried away their sorrows. How it has filled our nets with food and our hearts with wonder. This is the story of humanity and the CIA relationship, as old as consciousness itself, as complex as the currents that flow beneath the waves, and as enduring as the tides that have marked our days since we first walked upright along ancient shores. There is something about the edge of the ocean that has always called to human hearts. Stand on any coastline in the world and you'll find evidence of our ancient attraction to these liminal spaces, the places where solid earth meets liquid infinity. Archaeological sites along every continent's shores tell the same story. Humans have been drawn to the sea's edge for hundreds of thousands of years. Perhaps it began with simple practicality. Coastal areas offered abundant resources: shellfish in tidal pools, seaweed rich in nutrients, fish in shallow waters, and salt for preserving food. But practicality alone cannot explain the profound pull we feel when we stand before the ocean. There is something deeper at work, something that speaks to the very rhythm of our existence. Consider the tides. Twice each day the sea breathes, in and out along every coastline, rhythm set by the ancient dance between earth and moon. Early coastal peoples learned to read this rhythm as intimately as their own pulse. They knew that the lowest tides revealed the richest feeding grounds, that certain fish arrived with the flood tide, that the highest tides could carry their boats over barriers that would otherwise block passage. This tidal rhythm became woven into human culture in ways both practical and profound. Along the coasts of Brittany, ancient Celtic peoples timed their religious ceremonies to the tides turning. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia's northern coasts developed complex calendars, based not just on seasons, but on the intricate patterns of spring tides and neap tides. In the Pacific Northwest, indigenous communities structured their entire year around the predictable returns of salmon that rode the tides, priver to spawn. But the influence went deeper than scheduling and ceremony. Living with the tides meant learning a different relationship with time itself. Inland time might be measured by the sun's arc across the sky, by seasons marked in growing plants and migrating animals. But coastal time was more complex, layered with the moon's influence, creating patterns within patterns. Fishermen needed to know not just the time of day and the season of the year, but where the moon stood in its cycle, whether the tide was building toward spring or settling toward neat. This intimate knowledge of tidal time taught coastal peoples patience of a particular kind. The sea would give up its treasures only when it was ready, only when the tides and seasons aligned properly. You could not force the ocean to yield its gifts, could only learn its moods and work with them. Its lesson perhaps the first. Environmental wisdom our species learn is still echoes through every relationship we have with the natural world. Early coastal settlements reflected this understanding. Unlike inland communities that might grow in straight lines along rivers or in circles around central plazas, coastal villages developed organic shapes that followed the curves of bays and the contours of headlands. Houses faced the sea, not because of any romantic notion of ocean views, but because the sea was the source of weather, food, danger, and opportunity. To turn your back on the ocean was to miss the subtle signs that could mean the difference between feast and famine, safety and disaster. The physical act of living by the sea also shaped human bodies and cultures in distinctive ways. Peoples developed different skills, different strengths, different ways of reading the world. They learned to judge distance across water, where familiar landmarks could not guide them. They developed an acute sensitivity to changes in wind and weather. Understanding how the smell of the air or the feel of the breeze could predict storms hours before they arrived, children grew up as comfortable in water as on land, developing the kind of swimming skills that impressed later explorers and traders. But more than swimming, they learned to read water itself, how to spot the telltale ripples that revealed hidden rocks, how to identify the different types of waves and what they meant, how to find channels and avoid shallows by watching the color and movement of the surface. This intimate physical relationship with the sea created the first marine technologies. The earliest boats were probably simple raft logs lashed together, or bundles of reeds sealed with natural resins. But even these simple craft represented profound technological leaps. To build a boat, even the simplest raft, required understanding, buoyancy and stability, materials, science, and design principles. It required the ability to imagine moving across water rather than simply along its edge. The transition from land-dwelling to sea-going represents one of humanity's great intellectual adventures. Water is a medium unlike any we evolved to navigate. It provides no permanent landmarks, offers no solid footing, changes constantly with weather and tide. Yet somehow, our ancestors learned not just to survive on the ocean, but to thrive there, to use it as a highway connecting distant lands. The earliest ocean navigation was probably coastal, following familiar shorelines from bay to bay, but even this required new ways of thinking about space and direction. On land, you could climb a tree or a hill to get your bearings, could follow animal trails or river valleys. On water, you had to learn to read more subtle signs, the direction of swells, the behavior of birds, the color and temperature of the water itself. Polynesian navigators developed perhaps the most sophisticated traditional ocean navigation system ever created. These master wayfinders could cross thousands of miles of open Pacific, using no instruments except their senses and their accumulated cultural knowledge. They read the ocean like a vast text, interpreting the language of waves and winds, stars and sea life. A Polynesian navigator could feel the difference between ocean swells that had traveled hundreds of miles from distant storms and local waves created by nearby islands. It could detect the presence of land beyond the horizon by watching the behavior of certain seabirds that flew out to sea during the day but returned to land each night. They could judge their latitude by the height of certain stars above the horizon and estimate their progress by the subtle changes in water, color, and temperature as they moved between different ocean regions. This navigation knowledge was not written down but carried in human memory, passed from master to student through years of training. Navigators learned to see the ocean's invisible landscape, the currents that flowed like rivers through the sea, the underwater mountains that created distinctive wave patterns on the surface, the seasonal changes in wind and weather that opened or closed different sailing routes. But Polynesian navigation was just one solution to the puzzle of ocean travel. Around the world, different cultures developed their own methods for finding their way across the trackless sea. Arab navigators created sophisticated techniques for using the stars, developing astronomical knowledge that would later influence European navigation. They could determine their position by measuring the height of particular stars with simple but elegant instruments. and they maintained detailed written records of sailing directions that described not just routes, but the seasonal timing that made different passages possible. Norse seafarers developed their own approaches to ocean navigation, adapted to the harsh conditions of the North Atlantic. They learned to use sun compasses on clear days and to read the behavior of sea ice as a guide to weather and direction. They could recognize the distinctive cloud formations that formed over distant islands, and they developed techniques for using the flight patterns of seabirds to locate land, even in fog and overcast conditions. In each case, learning to navigate. The ocean required developing entirely new relationships with the natural world. Land navigation could rely on stable, permanent features, mountains that stayed in place, rivers that flowed in predictable directions. Ocean navigation demanded understanding systems that were constantly in motion, constantly changing, yet still following underlying patterns that patient observation could reveal. This shift in thinking had profound implications beyond navigation. Societies that mastered ocean travel developed different concepts of space and time, different relationships with risk and uncertainty. They became comfortable with ambiguity in ways that land-based cultures often were not. The ocean taught them that you could be utterly lost, yet still exactly where you needed to be. That the shortest distance between 2 points might not be a straight line if currents and winds were taken into account. Ocean navigation also required new forms of cultural knowledge transmission. Unlike farming or hunting, which could be learned through daily observation and gradual practice, navigation required carrying vast amounts of precise information in human memory. This led to the development of elaborate mnemonic systems, teaching songs and stories that encoded crucial navigational knowledge in forms that could be accurately remembered and passed down through generations, long before humans learned to plant seeds or domesticate animals. We were harvesting the sea. The ocean's edge provided a reliable source of protein and nutrients that helped fuel the growth of human brains and the development of complex societies. But learning to harvest the sea effectively required developing entirely new technologies and entirely new ways of thinking about the relationship between hunter and hunted. The simplest sea harvesting required no technology at all, just the willingness to wade into tidal pools and gather what the retreating waves revealed. Shellfish, seaweed, sea urchins, small fish trapped in pools, all of these could be collected by hand. But even this simple gathering required considerable knowledge. Coastal peoples had to learn which creatures were safe to eat and which were poisonous, which were best at different times of year, which tides revealed the richest collecting grounds. This knowledge was often surprisingly sophisticated. Pacific Northwest peoples developed detailed understanding of red tide cycles that could make shellfish deadly to eat. They knew precisely which months were safe for harvesting different species and could read subtle signs in the water's color, or the behavior of seabirds that warned of dangerous conditions. They developed sustainable harvesting practices that ensured continued abundant staking only certain sizes of shellfish, rotating between different collecting areas, timing harvests to avoid breeding seasons. As humans developed tools, sea harvesting became more sophisticated. Simple spears for catching fish in shallow water, hooks carved from bone or shell for fishing from rocks or simple rafts, nets woven from plant fibers for trapping schools of fish in tidal channels. Each technology opened up new possibilities, but also required new kinds of knowledge and skill. Net fishing, for example, required understanding fish behavior in ways that individual hook and line fishing did not. Fishers had to learn where different species schooled at different times of year, how to set nets to take advantage of tidal currents, how to work cooperatively to deploy and retrieve large nets effectively. This led to the development of some of humanity's first complex cooperative work systems, coordinated group activities that required precise timing and shared understanding of technique. The development of more sophisticated boats allowed fishing to move beyond the coastal shallows into deeper, richer waters. But deepwater fishing required new technologies and new understanding. Stronger lines, heavier weights, different types of hooks for different species living at different depths. Fishers had to learn to read the subtle surface signs that revealed the underwater landscape, how waves behaved differently over reefs or drop-offs, how water color changed with depth, how the presence of certain surface fish indicated what might be swimming in the depths below. Ocean fishing also required different concepts of time and planning than land-based hunting. Fish populations migrated according to seasonal patterns that might stretch across thousands of miles of ocean. Successful fishing communities had to develop sophisticated understanding of these patterns, knowing not just when different species would appear in local waters, but where they were coming from and where they were going. This led to the development of some of the world's first long-range economic planning. Communities would prepare for seasonal fishing runs months in advance, creating the tools and preserving materials they would need, organizing the labor needed for intensive harvesting periods, and developing storage and preservation techniques that could turn temporary abundance into year-round sustenance. The techniques for preserving sea harvests varied dramatically around the world, each adapted to local conditions and resources. In cold climates, fish could be frozen or dried in the wind and sun. In warmer areas, smoking and salting became primary preservation methods. Coastal peoples developed dozens of different techniques for making fish and shellfish last through lean seasons, fermenting fish into protein-rich pastes, rendering fish oils that could be stored for months, creating fish leathers that could be eaten during emergencies. But perhaps the most important thing that sea harvesting taught human communities was the need for sustainable practice. Unlike land game that could be hunted to local extinction, or forests that could be cleared, the ocean's resources were largely beyond human ability to completely control or destroy. This created different relationships with resource management practices focused not on domination or extraction, but on maintaining long-term relationships with natural cycles. Traditional fishing communities developed elaborate systems of rules and taboos designed to prevent over-harvesting. Many cultures had seasonal restrictions on certain types of fishing, breeding season protections for key species, territorial systems that prevented any single group from depleting an entire fishing ground. These weren't environmental conservation in the modern sense, but practical recognition that the sea's bounty, while vast, was not infinite. The ocean gives life, but it also takes it away. Anyone who has lived by the sea for long learns to respect its power, to understand that the same waters that provide food and transportation can become instruments of destruction with little warning. Learning to live with the sea's volatile moods has shaped coastal cultures in profound ways, creating societies that are simultaneously confident and cautious, adventurous and humble. Ocean storms are unlike anything experienced inland. On land, you can seek shelter behind hills or in valleys, can find protection among trees or rocks. But the ocean offers no such refuge. Storms at sea create walls of water that can swallow ships, winds that can drive vessels helplessly off course, conditions that can turn familiar coastal waters into alien, hostile landscapes. Coastal peoples developed elaborate systems for predicting and preparing for ocean storms. They learned to read subtle changes in wave patterns, wind direction, cloud formations, even the behavior of sea life as indicators of approaching weather. In the Caribbean, indigenous peoples could predict hurricanes days in advance by watching the flight patterns of seabirds and the color of sunset. Pacific Island cultures developed detailed knowledge of seasonal storm patterns, knowing which months brought cyclones and which routes offered the safest passage during dangerous seasons, but prediction was only part of storm survival. Coastal communities also had to develop physical and social structures that could withstand oceanic fury. Houses were built with deep foundations and flexible construction that could bend with hurricane winds. Boats were designed with multiple, watertight compartments that could keep vessels afloat even when partially flooded. Entire communities developed evacuation plans that could move people and essential supplies to higher ground when storm surges threatened. The social response to ocean dangers was equally important. Coastal communities developed strong traditions of mutual aid and shared responsibility. When storms threatened, personal property became community property. Boats that could carry evacuees, houses that could shelter neighbors, food stores that could sustain everyone through the emergency. These weren't temporary crisis responses, but permanent cultural features. Recognition that survival at the ocean's edge required thinking beyond individual needs. Tsunamis represent perhaps the ocean's most terrifying power, the ability to reach far inland and devastate areas that normally considered themselves safe from sea dangers. Yet even these massive waves left their mark on coastal cultures. Many Pacific communities maintained oral traditions describing great waves that had struck in the distant past. Stories that preserved crucial information about which areas were safest during such events, and how to recognize the warning signs that preceded them. The withdrawal of water from harbors and beaches, the strange behavior of ocean life, the unusual sounds that sometimes preceded great waves. These subtle indicators were preserved in cultural memory and passed down through generations as life-saving knowledge. In some cultures, children were taught from early age to recognize these signs and to immediately flee to high ground without waiting for adult instruction. But the sea's destructive power wasn't limited to dramatic events like storms and tsunamis. Coastal erosion could slowly devour entire communities over the course of years or decades. Rising or falling sea levels could make harbors unusable or turn inland areas into new coastlines. Changes in ocean currents could alter local climates, affecting everything from fish populations to agricultural productivity. These slower changes required different types of adaptation. Communities had to remain flexible, ready to relocate or rebuild as conditions changed. They developed portable technologies and transferable skills, rather than investing everything in permanent infrastructure. They maintained extensive networks of relationships with other coastal communities, creating social safety nets that could provide support when local conditions became untenable. Perhaps most importantly, living with the sea's dangerous moods taught coastal peoples particular attitudes toward risk and uncertainty. They learned to make decisions with incomplete information, to balance potential rewards against possible disasters, to maintain hope and determination in the face of forces much larger than human control. These psychological adaptations became deeply embedded in coastal cultures, creating societies that were often more willing to take calculated risks, more comfortable with change and uncertainty, more resilient in the face of setbacks. The ocean's power also inspired profound spiritual responses. Many coastal cultures developed elaborate ritual practices designed to appease sea spirits or invoke divine protection for ocean ventures. These ceremonies served practical psychological functions, helping individuals and communities process the anxiety that came with dependence on such powerful and unpredictable forces. They also reinforced social bonds and shared cultural knowledge, creating group experiences that strengthened community solidarity. In the end, learning to live with the sea's moods taught humanity some of its most important lessons about the relationship between human ambition and natural power. The ocean was too vast to conquer, too dynamic to completely predict, too essential to abandon. Success came not from domination but from adaptation, not from control but from understanding, not from resistance but from flexibility. These lessons learned at the ocean's edge proved valuable far beyond coastal communities as human societies grew more complex and began to grapple with other forces beyond their control. Long before highways crossed continents or railways connected distant cities, the ocean served as humanity's first great transportation network. These liquid highways carried more than just people and goods. They carried ideas, technologies, languages, and dreams across vast distances, connecting isolated communities into the complex web of relationships that would eventually become global civilization. The earliest ocean trade routes were probably quite short, connecting nearby coastal communities or linking islands visible from each other across narrow straits. But even these modest beginnings represented revolutionary thinking. To load valuable goods onto a fragile boat and trust them to the uncertain sea required not just courage, but sophisticated understanding of risk and reward, supply and demand. the complex calculations that would eventually develop into global economics. The Phoenicians were among the first peoples to systematically develop long-distance ocean trade into a way of life. From their home ports along the eastern Mediterranean coast, they ventured far beyond familiar waters, establishing trading posts along the North African coast in Spain, and eventually even beyond the Strait of Gibraltar into the Atlantic. They created the first truly international maritime trading network, one that connected diverse cultures and economies across thousands of miles of ocean. What made Phoenician trade possible was not just seafaring skill, though they were masterful. Navigators and shipbuilders, equally important was their development of new forms of economic and social organization. They created standardized systems of weights and measures that made trade possible between communities. With different currencies and customs, they developed diplomatic skills that allowed them to negotiate with foreign rulers and establish peaceful trading relationships. They pioneered credit systems and partnership arrangements that could spread the risks and rewards of long-distance trade among multiple investors. The goods that moved along these ancient sea routes reveal the sophisticated tastes and complex needs of early urban civilizations. Phoenician ships carried purple dye extracted from Mediterranean sea snails, a luxury product so expensive that purple became the color of royalty. They transported cedar wood from Lebanese mountains to Treeless, Egypt, where it was used to build temples and royal palaces. They carried silver from Spanish mines, tin from distant Atlantic islands, precious stones and incense from Arabia and Africa. But perhaps more important than any physical cargo was the movement of ideas and technologies along these maritime trade routes. Phoenician traders carried alphabetic writing systems that would eventually evolve into most modern scripts. They spread new agricultural techniques, new methods of metalworking, new forms of art and architecture. They served as cultural ambassadors, carrying stories and myths, religious practices and philosophical ideas from one civilization to another. In the Indian Ocean, different but equally sophisticated trading system developed around the monsoon winds. Traders learned to use these seasonal wind reversals to create regular circuits connecting the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, India, and eventually Southeast Asia and China. Ships would sail eastward on the southwest monsoon, trade their goods during the months when winds were calm, then return westward on the northeast monsoon. This monsoon trading system created some of the world's first truly multicultural cities. Ports like Malacca, Calicut, Hormuz became cosmopolitan centers where merchants from dozens of different cultures gathered to trade, creating hybrid communities that blended languages, religions, foods, and customs. These port cities developed their own unique identities, neither fully belonging to any single culture, nor entirely separate from their various influences. The scale of monsoon trade was enormous. Chinese porcelain and silk moved westward to markets in Persia and Europe. Arabian horses and frankincense traveled eastward to India and beyond. African gold and ivory, Indian spices and cotton, Southeast Asian tin and aromatic woods all moved along sea routes that connected most of the inhabited world centuries before. European exploration reached similar scales. What's remarkable about these ancient trading systems is how they developed without central coordination or governmental support. They emerged from the accumulated decisions of thousands of individual traders, each responding to local opportunities and constraints, yet somehow creating coherent networks that spanned continents. This organic development created trading systems that were remarkably resilient, able to adapt to political changes, natural disasters, and shifting economic conditions. The Mediterranean trading world survived the rise and fall of empires, the devastation of wars, changes in technology and culture. When Roman power declined, Byzantine and Arab traders picked up the connections. When political conflicts closed some routes, new ones opened elsewhere. The fundamental pattern using the sea to connect distant communities and exchange there. Specialized products proved more durable than any individual civilization by the 15th century. European societies had developed both the technological capabilities and the economic motivations to attempt something that had never been done before systematic exploration of the world's oceans with the goal of mapping and ultimately controlling global trade routes. This age of exploration would transform not just European societies but the entire world, creating the first truly global economy and beginning the process that would eventually connect every inhabited corner of the planet. The Norse had already demonstrated that long ocean voyages were possible, reaching Iceland, Greenland, and eventually North America centuries before Columbus. But Norse exploration remained limited in scope and impact, creating isolated settlements rather than systematic trade networks. The European exploration that began in the 15th century was different in scale and ambition, aimed at replacing existing trade routes with new ones under European control. Portuguese explorers led this new wave of ocean exploration, methodically working their way down the African coast in search of a sea route to Asian spice markets. Each voyage pushed a little farther south, carefully mapping coastlines and wind patterns, establishing supply bases that could support future expeditions. This systematic approach allowed them to gradually overcome the technical challenges of long-distance ocean navigation. The breakthrough came when Portuguese navigators learned to use the Atlantic's wind patterns to their advantage. Instead of fighting contrary winds along the African coast, they developed the technique of sailing far out into the Atlantic, using trade winds to carry them south, then catching different wind patterns to approach the African coast from the west. This Volta do Mar technique allowed them to reach the southern tip of Africa and eventually establish the sea route to India that would make Portugal wealthy and powerful. Christopher Columbus's voyages across the Atlantic represented a different approach to the same goal of finding new routes to Asian markets. Based on miscalculations of the Earth's size and the width of the Pacific Ocean, Columbus believed he could reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic. His error led to one of history's most consequential accidents, the European discovery of the Americas and the beginning of sustained contact between the Old and New Worlds. The impact of Columbus's voyages extended far beyond navigation and geography. The encounter between European and American societies initiated massive biological and cultural exchanges that would reshape both worlds. European diseases devastated American populations that lacked immunity, while American crops like potatoes, maize, and tomatoes eventually transformed European agriculture and diets. Silver from American mines flooded into European and Asian economies, creating inflation and shifting global balances of economic power. Spanish exploration and conquest in the Americas was followed by systematic Pacific exploration as Europeans gradually realized the true size and complexity of the world's largest ocean. Spanish expeditions from Mexico reached the Philippines, establishing the first regular trans-Pacific trade route. The annual Manila Galleon carried Asian silk and porcelain eastward to Mexico, then overland to Atlantic ports, while American silver moved westward to Asian markets. Meanwhile, other European nations developed their own approaches to ocean exploration. Dutch navigators focused on finding northern passages to Asia, leading to the exploration of Arctic waters and the mapping of complex routes around northern Russia and Canada. English explorers combined trade with systematic scientific observation, producing increasingly accurate maps and navigation techniques that would benefit all ocean travelers. The French approach to ocean exploration emphasized scientific understanding as much as commercial gain. French expeditions often included natural historians, astronomers, and cartographers whose careful observations advanced European knowledge of geography, oceanography, and navigation. They developed new techniques for determining longitude at sea, mapped ocean currents and wind patterns, and created increasingly accurate charts that made ocean travel safer and more predictable. What distinguished European exploration from earlier maritime adventures was its systematic character and its connection to larger economic and political goals. Earlier ocean travelers had generally been content to establish trading relationships with existing societies and work within established systems. European explorers aimed to replace existing systems with new ones under European control, using superior naval technology and systematic mapping to create competitive advantages. The ships themselves represented remarkable technological achievements. European shipbuilders developed vessels that combined the best features of different maritime traditions, Mediterranean hull designs that could withstand ocean storms, Arabic sail configurations that could handle various wind conditions, Chinese compass and rudder technologies that improved navigation and steering. These hybrid designs created ships capable of longer voyages and more reliable performance than anything previously built. But technology alone cannot explain the success of European ocean exploration. Equally important were new forms of economic organization that could finance expensive expeditions and distribute their risks among multiple investors. Joint stock companies, maritime insurance, and improved banking systems allowed European societies to organize exploration on unprecedented scales and sustain the losses that inevitably accompanied such risky ventures. The success of European ocean exploration led to the creation of maritime empires, political and economic systems that used control of sea routes to project power across vast distances and coordinate activities on multiple continents. These empires represented a new form of political organization, one that depended not on controlling contiguous territory, but on maintaining networks of naval bases, trading posts, and colonial settlements connected by oceanic transportation. Portugal created the first truly global maritime empire, establishing a chain of fortified trading posts that stretched from Brazil to Macau. These posts were strategically located to control key sea routes and provide bases for further expansion. Unlike traditional land-based empires that sought to control large territories and populations, the Portuguese maritime empire focused on controlling strategic points that could command ocean traffic and extract wealth from existing trade networks. The Portuguese approach was essentially parasitic, inserting Portuguese control into existing Asian and African trade systems, rather than creating entirely new economic structures. Portuguese officials collected taxes and fees from traders who used Portuguese-controlled ports, sold licenses that allowed other European merchants to operate in Asian waters, and used naval power to enforce monopolies on particularly valuable trades like spices and precious stones. Spain developed a different model of maritime empire, one that combined oceanic transportation with large-scale colonial settlement and resource extraction. Spanish conquests in Mexico and Peru provided enormous quantities of silver that funded further expansion and created global economic networks centered on Spanish colonial cities. The annual treasure fleets that carried American silver to Spain became the backbone of the world's first truly global economy. Spanish maritime empire required much more complex administrative systems than Portuguese trading posts. Spain had to govern large colonial populations, coordinate mining and agricultural operations across vast territories, maintain naval forces capable of protecting treasure fleets from pirates and rival European powers. This led to the development of sophisticated bureaucratic structures and new forms of long-distance communication and coordination. The Dutch approach to maritime empire emphasized commercial efficiency over territorial control. Dutch trading companies like the VOC United East India Company operated as quasi-governmental organizations with their own naval forces, diplomatic representatives, and administrative systems. They focused on maximizing profits from Asian trade, rather than governing large populations or extracting tribute from conquered territories. Dutch maritime success depended heavily on superior ship design and more efficient business organization. Dutch shipbuilders created standardized vessel designs that reduced construction costs and improved reliability. Dutch merchants developed new financial instruments, like joint stock ownership and maritime insurance, that allowed them to organize larger expeditions and spread risks more effectively than their competitors. The result was a maritime empire that operated more like a modern multinational corporation than a traditional political state. The VOC established trading posts throughout Asia, negotiated commercial agreements with local rulers, and maintained naval forces to protect its operations. But it generally avoided the expenses and complications of large-scale territorial conquest. In colonial administration, Britain eventually created the largest and most durable maritime empire, combining elements from all previous European approaches. Like the Portuguese, Britain established strategic naval bases that could control key sea routes. Like the Spanish, Britain developed large-scale colonial settlements that could provide both markets and raw materials. Like the Dutch, Britain emphasized commercial efficiency and technological innovation. What distinguished British Maritime Empire was its systematic integration of naval power, commercial organization, and industrial development. British naval superiority protected British merchant shipping and disrupted the operations of rival European powers. British colonial policies encouraged the production of raw materials that British factories could process into finished goods. British financial institutions provided the capital needed to coordinate these complex global operations. The Royal Navy became the enforcement mechanism for what was essentially a global protection racket. British naval power protected British merchant shipping, but it also protected the shipping of other nations that accepted British commercial dominance and contributed to British prosperity. Countries that challenged British maritime supremacy found their own shipping vulnerable too. British naval attacks and their access to global markets restricted or eliminated. Maritime empires created the world's first global labor systems, moving people across oceans to work in mines, plantations, and trading posts far from their original homes. The Atlantic slave trade transported millions of Africans to work in American sugar and tobacco plantations. Indentured servants from Europe and Asia provided labor for colonial expansion. These forced migration systems created new cultural combinations and social structures throughout the colonial world. The cultural impact of maritime empires was enormous. European languages, religions, legal systems, and educational institutions spread throughout the colonial world. While colonial products, ideas, and cultural practices influenced European societies, these cultural exchanges created hybrid societies that combined elements from multiple traditions. Though usually within power structures that favored European interests and values, the Industrial Revolution transformed ocean transportation as dramatically as it transformed land-based production and communication. Steam power freed ships from dependence on wind and weather, allowing more reliable scheduling and route planning. Iron and steel hulls made ships larger, stronger, and more durable. New navigation technologies made ocean travel safer and more predictable. The result was a transportation revolution that made possible the economic globalization of the modern world. The first steamships were essentially sailing vessels, with auxiliary steam engines used primarily for river and coastal transportation, where coal supplies could be readily obtained. But as steam technology improved and coaling stations were established along major ocean routes, steam power began to replace wind power for long-distance transportation. By the mid-19th century, steamship lines were providing regular scheduled service between Europe and North America, reducing crossing times from weeks to days and making ocean travel accessible to middle-class passengers as well as wealthy elites. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 represented a new approach to improving ocean transportation, modifying geography itself rather than just improving ships and navigation. The canal created a direct water route between Europe and Asia that eliminated the need to sail around the entire African continent, reducing voyage times and costs while increasing the reliability of Asian trade. Similar projects like the Panama Canal would later provide shortcuts through other geographical barriers. The development of refrigerated cargo holds revolutionized global food systems, making it possible to transport perishable goods across long distances and connect agricultural regions with distant markets. Argentine beef, Australian mutton, and New Zealand dairy products could reach European tables while still fresh. This technology created global markets for agricultural products and allowed specialized agricultural regions to develop far from their ultimate consumers. Perhaps the most important development in modern ocean transportation was the standardization of cargo handling through containerization. For containers, loading and unloading ships was labor-intensive work that required days or weeks in port. Different types of cargo required different handling techniques, and theft and damage during loading were constant problems. The development of standardized containers that could be efficiently moved between ships Trucks and railways transformed shipping from a slow, expensive service into a fast, reliable component of global manufacturing systems. Container shipping made possible the global supply chains that characterize modern manufacturing. A single product might include raw materials from multiple continents, components manufactured in several different countries, and final assembly in yet another location, all connected by container ships that could move goods efficiently between distant ports. This system allowed manufacturers to locate different stages of production wherever costs were lowest or capabilities were best, creating the integrated global economy of the modern world. The scale of modern shipping is almost impossible to comprehend. The largest container ships can carry more than 20,000 containers, each capable of holding tons of cargo. A single ship might carry goods from thousands of different manufacturers destined for hundreds of thousands of different consumers. The port of Shanghai alone handles more cargo each year than most countries produce, while the global shipping industry moves billions of tons of goods annually across the world's oceans. Modern shipping has also become remarkably efficient and predictable. GPS navigation allows ships to follow optimal routes and avoid dangerous weather. Satellite communication keeps shore-based managers informed of ship locations and cargo status. Computer systems coordinate the movement of containers through complex networks of ships, ports, and land transportation. Just-in-time manufacturing systems depend on this predictability, ordering materials and components with the assumption that shipping schedules will be met with minimal delays. Yet this efficiency and predictability have created new forms of vulnerability. Modern economic systems depend so heavily on ocean transportation that disruptions to shipping can quickly affect global supply chains. The temporary blocking of the Suez Canal by a grounded container ship in 2021 demonstrated how a single incident could disrupt global trade worth billions of dollars. Piracy in key shipping lanes, political conflicts that affect port operations, or natural disasters that damage port facilities can all have far-reaching economic consequences. The environmental impact of modern TSHS shipping has become an increasing concern as the scale of ocean transportation has grown. Ships burn enormous quantities of fuel and produce significant air and water pollution. The ballast water that ships use for stability has transported invasive species around the world, disrupting marine ecosystems. The noise from ship engines interferes with marine mammal communication and navigation. These environmental costs are leading to new regulations and technologies designed to reduce shipping's ecological footprint. Despite these challenges, ocean transportation remains the backbone of global economic integration. More than 90% of global trade moves by ship at some point. And the economic benefits of efficient ocean transportation continue to drive technological innovation and system improvements. New ship designs promise lower fuel consumption and reduced emissions. Automated systems may eventually reduce crew requirements and improve safety. Alternative fuels and propulsion systems could reduce environmental impacts while maintaining the efficiency that makes global trade possible. Since humans first gazed upon the endless expanse of ocean, the sea has occupied a unique place in our collective imagination. Neither entirely alive nor completely inanimate, neither fully knowable nor completely alien. The ocean has inspired some of humanity's most profound mythological thinking. Every culture that has encountered the sea has created stories to explain its mysteries, to give meaning to its power, and to negotiate the complex relationship between human needs and oceanic forces. Beyond human control, the earliest sea mythologies often focused on the ocean as a primordial force, the source from which all life emerged. In Babylonian creation myths, the saltwater goddess Tiamat represented the chaotic waters from which the ordered world was created through divine struggle. This pattern, the sea is primordial chaos that must be overcome or negotiated with to create livable space, appears in mythologies around the world, suggesting something fundamental about how humans experience the relationship between order and wildness, safety and danger. Greek mythology created perhaps the most elaborate and influential system of sea deities and stories. Poseidon, god of the sea, embodied both the ocean's life-giving and life-taking aspects. He could calm waters to ensure safe voyages or raise storms that destroyed entire fleets. He created springs of fresh water and caused earthquakes controlled horses and bulls, and presided over both peaceful coastal communities and the terrors of the deep sea. Poseidon's complex, contradictory character reflected Greek understanding of the sea itself as simultaneously beneficial and dangerous, as predictable and capricious. The Greek pantheon included dozens of lesser sea deities, each representing different aspects of oceanic experience. Nereid sea nymphs personified the beauty and grace of calm waters, while sirens represented the sea's power to lure travelers to destruction. Triton, son of Poseidon, could calm or raise waves with his conch shell. Trumpet, Proteus, the shape-shifting old man of the sea, embodied the ocean's infinite capacity for change and transformation. These mythological figures weren't just stories, but practical psychology, ways of understanding and coping with the emotional realities of life at the ocean's edge. When fishermen made offerings to Poseidon before embarking on dangerous voyages, they were acknowledging their vulnerability and seeking whatever psychological comfort ritual could provide. When communities celebrated festivals honoring sea deities, they were reinforcing social bonds and shared cultural knowledge that helped them survive oceanic challenges. Norse mythology developed its own rich tradition of sea stories, adapted to the harsh conditions of northern waters. Aegir and Ran, the giant couple who ruled the sea, were portrayed as more consistently dangerous than their Mediterranean counterparts, reflecting the reality of North Atlantic sailing conditions. Ran used her net to drag sailors down to her underwater hull, while Aegir brewed the storms that could destroy even the strongest ships. Yet these dangerous deities could also be generous hosts, providing feasts for warriors who died bravely at sea. The Norse concept of the sea as a road connecting different worlds influenced their understanding of death and afterlife. Warriors who died at sea might go to Aegir's Hall rather than Valhalla, but this wasn't necessarily a lesser fate. The sea road connected the world of the living with various supernatural realms, making ocean death a form of travel rather than simple ending. This mythological framework helped Norse societies cope with the high mortality rates associated with North Atlantic seafaring. Pacific Island mythologies developed sophisticated understandings of the ocean as a living, conscious entity that required proper relationships rather than simple worship or appeasement. Polynesian traditions describe the sea as having memory, personality, and preferences that navigators needed to understand and respect. The ocean could teach those who approached it properly, revealing navigation secrets and warning of dangers. But it could also punish those who showed disrespect or ignorance. Hawaiian traditions included elaborate protocols for interacting with ocean spirits, including specific chants and offerings that acknowledged the sea's power while requesting safe passage. These weren't superstitions, but sophisticated psychological and social technologies that helped maintain the mental discipline and cultural knowledge necessary for successful ocean travel. Breaking protocol didn't anger mythical beings so much as it indicated dangerous lapses in attention and preparation that could lead to real disasters. Many cultures developed mythologies that explained the ocean's role in human destiny and cosmic order. Hindu traditions described the ocean of milk that surrounded the world, from which gods and demons worked together to churn forth the nectar of immortality. This cosmic ocean wasn't just a geographical feature but a fundamental principle of existence, representing the universal solvent from which all possibilities emerged and to which they eventually returned. Celtic mythologies portrayed the Western ocean as the gateway to the other world, the realm of spirits and eternal youth that lay beyond the sunset. The Imram, traditional Irish voyage tales, described heroes sailing westward across dangerous waters to reach magical islands where different rules of time and mortality applied. These stories reflected both practical knowledge of Atlantic sailing conditions and deep psychological insights about the relationship between physical and spiritual journeys. African mythologies often focused on the relationship between rivers and the ocean, seeing the sea as the ultimate destination of all waters, and therefore, all life. Yoruba traditions describe Umoja, the mother goddess whose domain included both rivers and oceans, as the source of all fertility and the protector of women and children. Her worship spread throughout the African diaspora, adapting to new oceanic environments while maintaining core understandings of water as the fundamental life force. What's remarkable about sea mythologies from around the world is how they consistently recognize the ocean's fundamental ambiguity. Unlike land-based deities who might be clearly beneficial or harmful, sea gods and spirits are almost always complex, contradictory figures who embody both creative and destructive powers. This mythological complexity reflects accurate psychological understanding of what it means to depend on forces much larger and more powerful than human control. The sea has inspired human, artistic expression for as long as people have made art. From the earliest cave paintings that depicted marine life, to contemporary installations that capture the ocean's movement and sound, artists have found in the sea both subject matter and metaphor, both inspiration and challenge. The ocean's visual complexity, its constantly changing colors, textures, and patterns has pushed artists to develop new techniques and explore new possibilities in every medium. Maritime art reached early peaks in cultures that depended heavily on ocean, resources, and transportation. Ancient Egyptian tomb paintings included detailed depictions of fishing and boat building, preserving both practical knowledge and spiritual beliefs about the afterlife journey across celestial waters. Greek pottery featured elaborate sea scenes that combined mythological narratives with accurate observations of marine life and sailing techniques. These weren't just decorative objects, but cultural repositories that preserved and transmitted essential knowledge about oceanic relationships. Medieval European art often portrayed the sea as a dangerous, chaotic force that threatened Christian order and civilization. Illuminated manuscripts depicted sea monsters and storms as symbols of spiritual peril, while maps decorated their oceanic spaces with warnings about dangerous creatures and unknown hazards. This artistic tradition reflected theological understandings that saw the ocean as part of the fallen world that believers needed to navigate carefully on their way to spiritual salvation. The Renaissance brought new approaches to maritime art. As European exploration expanded knowledge of oceanic geography and cultures, artists like Peter Bruegel the Elder created detailed seascapes that captured both the beauty and the violence of ocean life, showing ships struggling through storms. While also depicting the daily activities of coastal communities, these paintings combined accurate observation with symbolic content. Using maritime scenes to explore themes about human fate and divine providence, Dutch Golden Age painters elevated seascape to new artistic heights, creating works that celebrated maritime commerce while also exploring deeper themes about human relationships with natural forces. Artists like Willem van de Velde and Jacob van Rooijendaal developed techniques for depicting water, sky, and ships with unprecedented realism and emotional power. Their paintings captured the pride that Dutch society felt in its maritime achievements, while also acknowledging the risks and costs associated with ocean-based prosperity. The Romantic movement found in the sea a perfect subject for exploring themes about the sublime, the relationship between human consciousness and natural power. J.M.W. Turner's Seascapes, painting toward abstraction as he attempted to capture not just the ocean's appearance, but its essential energy and movement. His techniques influenced generations of artists who saw in maritime subjects opportunities to explore the boundaries between representation and pure expression. Casper. David Friedrich's sea paintings used oceanic imagery to explore philosophical and spiritual themes about human solitude and cosmic meaning. His famous painting, The Monk by the Sea, presents a tiny human figure contemplating the vast, empty ocean, creating a visual meditation on mortality and transcendence that continues to resonate with contemporary viewers. Friedrich's work demonstrated how maritime art could function as both landscape painting and existential philosophy. Literature has been equally inspired by oceanic themes and imagery. Homer's Odyssey established many of the narrative patterns that continue to influence sea literature, using the ocean as both obstacle and testing ground for heroic character. Odysseus's long journey home across dangerous waters became a template for stories about personal growth through adversity. While the various islands he encounters represent different aspects of human, Nature and social organization. Medieval literature developed rich traditions of sea voyages as spiritual allegories. The Irish Imram described heroes sailing to supernatural islands where they encountered tests of character and glimpses of otherworldly wisdom. These voyage tales combined practical knowledge about ocean travel with psychological insights about personal transformation, creating narrative forms that could operate simultaneously as adventure stories and spiritual guidance. Moby Dick represents perhaps the greatest achievement of maritime literature, using the specific details of 19th century whaling to explore universal themes about obsession, fate, and the relationship between human will and natural power. Herman Melville's novel demonstrates how oceanic settings can provide both realistic, narrative backgrounds and powerful symbolic frameworks for exploring the deepest questions about human existence and meaning. Joseph Conrad's sea fiction drew on his own experience as a merchant marine officer to create stories that used maritime settings to explore themes about moral complexity, cultural encounter, and psychological isolation. Works like Heart of Darkness and Lord Jim used ocean voyages as frameworks for examining how extreme situations reveal hidden aspects of human character, while also exploring the cultural consequences of European maritime expansion. Contemporary literature continues to find in the sea rich sources of both inspiration and metaphor. Writers like Derek Walcott have used Caribbean maritime imagery to explore themes about cultural identity and historical memory in post-colonial societies. Annie Proulx's Shipping News demonstrated how oceanic settings could provide frameworks for examining contemporary social and economic changes. These works show how maritime literature continues to offer unique opportunities for exploring the relationships between individual experience and larger historical forces. Poetry has, perhaps, been most consistently inspired by oceanic themes, finding in the sea's rhythms and imagery natural subjects for exploring the musical and metaphorical possibilities of language. From ancient hymns celebrating sea deities to contemporary eco-poetry addressing ocean pollution, poets have used maritime imagery to explore every aspect of human experience. The sea's constant motion provides natural metaphors for temporal change, while its vast scale offers frameworks for contemplating infinity and transcendence. What distinguishes the best maritime art and literature is its ability to use oceanic subject matter to explore universal themes while also capturing the specific realities of life in relationship with the sea. Great sea art doesn't just depict ocean scenes, but uses maritime imagery to illuminate fundamental aspects of human experience, our relationships with power, beauty, danger, and mystery. In this way, the sea serves not just as artistic subject matter, but as a lens through which artists can examine and express the deepest patterns of human consciousness. Throughout human history, the ocean has been recognized as sacred space, a realm where the normal rules of terrestrial life are suspended, and humans encounter forces much larger than themselves. This recognition has generated elaborate systems of ritual and religious practice, designed to negotiate safe passage through oceanic dangers, to acknowledge the sea's power and mystery, and to maintain proper relationships between human communities and the vast waters that both sustain and threaten them. The most common maritime rituals focus on ensuring safe voyages and successful returns. These ceremonies typically combine practical preparation with spiritual protection, acknowledging that oceanic success depends on both human skill and forces beyond human control. Blessing the fleet ceremonies found in coastal communities around the world demonstrate this integration of practical and spiritual concerns. Boats are inspected and provisioned, crews are organized and instructed, but the fleet also receives religious blessing and divine protection. Catholic fishing communities developed elaborate traditions around the blessing of fishing fleets, typically timed to coincide with the beginning of fishing seasons or particularly dangerous voyages. These ceremonies involved not just priests and boats, but entire communities, acknowledging that oceanic ventures affected everyone who depended on maritime resources. Boats were blessed with holy water, crews received communion and absolution, and communities prayed together for safe returns and abundant catches. Similar traditions developed in Protestant maritime communities, adapted to different theological frameworks, but serving similar psychological and social functions. New England whaling communities held prayer meetings before fleet departures, while Pacific Northwest fishing communities developed their own ceremonies that combined Christian elements with older indigenous practices. These rituals created community solidarity and shared responsibility, while also providing individual psychological preparation for dangerous work. Japanese Shinto traditions developed sophisticated rituals for maintaining proper relationships with ocean spirits and ensuring maritime safety. Fishing communities held regular ceremonies to honor the spirits of specific fishing grounds, acknowledging their permission to harvest marine resources and requesting their continued cooperation. These weren't simple superstitions, but complex protocols that reinforced sustainable fishing practices while also providing psychological frameworks for coping with oceanic uncertainty. Hindu traditions include elaborate rituals for ocean worship, particularly associated with the annual Chath festival that honors the sun god and includes offerings made while standing in water. Devotees enter the ocean or rivers carrying offerings of fruit, flowers, and lamps, remaining in the water for hours while praying and singing. These ceremonies acknowledge the sacred nature of all waters while also creating direct physical contact. With aquatic elements, Islamic maritime traditions develop their own distinctive approaches to ocean ritual, emphasizing submission to divine will while also acknowledging human responsibility for careful preparation and skillful navigation. Muslim seafarers developed elaborate prayer cycles timed to ocean voyages, with specific supplications for different stages of maritime journeys. These prayers served both devotional and practical functions, providing regular opportunities for reflection and course correction during long voyages. Polynesian traditions created perhaps the most sophisticated integration of practical navigation knowledge with ritual practice. Traditional navigators underwent years of training that combined technical instruction with spiritual initiation, learning not just how to read stars and waves, but also how to maintain proper relationships with ocean spirits and ancestors. Navigation wasn't just technical skill, but sacred knowledge that required ritual preparation and ongoing ceremonial maintenance. These traditions recognized navigation as a form of conversation with supernatural forces, requiring appropriate protocols and respectful behavior. Navigators carried out specific rituals before departure, during voyages, and upon arrival, acknowledging the cooperation of spirits and ancestors, while also demonstrating their own worthiness to receive such assistance. Breaking ritual protocols wasn't just spiritually dangerous, but practically risky, indicating lapses in the mental discipline and cultural knowledge necessary for successful ocean travel. Viking traditions included elaborate funeral practices for warriors who died at sea, acknowledging the ocean's role in carrying souls to their final destinations. Ship burials, whether involving actual vessels or symbolic boat shapes, recognized the sea's function as a pathway between different worlds. These ceremonies helped communities cope with the high mortality associated with North Sea warfare and exploration, while also reinforcing cultural values about heroism and honor. Many coastal communities developed regular calendars of ocean-focused religious observances, timing ceremonies to coincide with seasonal changes in maritime conditions or marine life cycles. These celebrations served multiple functions, reinforcing community solidarity, preserving essential cultural knowledge, providing psychological preparation for challenging seasons, and maintaining proper relationships with supernatural forces that controlled oceanic conditions. The Feast of St. Peter, patron saint of fishermen, became a major celebration in Catholic maritime communities around the world. It's typically held during summer months when fishing was most active. These festivals combine religious devotion with community celebration, including boat races, seafood feasts, and processions that carried religious images to the water's edge for blessing ceremonies. Modern maritime religious practices continue many traditional patterns while adapting to contemporary conditions. Naval chaplains serve on modern warships and merchant vessels, providing both pastoral care and ceremonial continuity with older traditions of seeking divine protection for oceanic ventures. Waterfront churches continue to hold blessing ceremonies for fishing fleets and pleasure boats, acknowledging ongoing human dependence on forces beyond technological control. Environmental concerns have generated new forms of ocean-focused religious practice, including ceremonies that acknowledge human responsibility for marine pollution and climate change. These contemporary rituals often combine elements from multiple religious traditions with scientific understanding, creating new forms of spiritual practice appropriate to current ecological challenges. They represent ongoing evolution in human religious responses to oceanic relationships, rather than abandonment of older sacred traditions. The rhythmic sound of waves and shores has been humanity's soundtrack since our species first walked coastal areas, and this oceanic rhythm has profoundly influenced human musical development. The sea's sounds, waves, wind, gulls, creaking boats have provided both inspiration and structural models for musical composition, while maritime work and travel have created contexts for musical performance that have shaped folk traditions. Around the world, sea shanties represent perhaps the most distinctive form of maritime music. Work songs specifically designed to coordinate group labor aboard sailing ships. These songs weren't entertainment but functional technology, providing rhythmic frameworks that allowed crews to coordinate their efforts when hauling ropes, raising anchors, or pumping bilge water. Different types of maritime work required different musical rhythms, leading to the development of specialized shanty forms for specific shipboard tasks. Capstan shanties provided steady rhythms for long, sustained efforts like weighing anchor, with choruses that could be repeated indefinitely as work progressed. Halyard shanties offered sharper, rhythmic accents for coordinated pulling efforts, with musical structures that matched the alternating tension and release of rope work. Folk slee songs were performed during off-duty hours, providing entertainment and maintaining morale during long voyages when crews were confined together in small spaces. The lyrics of sea shanties preserved practical knowledge about maritime work while also creating spaces for social commentary and emotional expression. Shanty texts often included detailed information about navigation routes, weather patterns, and seamanship techniques, functioning as oral textbooks that transmitted essential knowledge through repetitive musical performance. At the same time, shanties provided opportunities for crews to express complaints about working conditions, homesickness, and relationships with officers and ship owners. Different maritime regions developed distinctive shanty traditions that reflected local conditions and cultural influences. British and American shanties often emphasized the themes of adventure and freedom, celebrating the independence that sea life offered despite its dangers and hardships. Caribbean shanties incorporated African musical elements and often addressed themes related to slavery and colonial exploitation. Pacific shanties might include Polynesian musical influences and references to whaling or island trading. Beyond work songs, maritime communities developed rich traditions of storytelling that preserved cultural knowledge while also providing entertainment during long winter months when fishing was impossible. These stories typically combined factual information about local waters, weather patterns, and marine life with supernatural elements that helped explain oceanic mysteries and cope with maritime dangers. Irish and Scottish fishing communities maintained elaborate traditions of sea stories that blended practical knowledge with mythological frameworks. Stories about Selkie seal people who could transform into humans provided ways of thinking about the relationship between human and marine worlds, while also preserving accurate information about seal behavior and marine ecology. Tales of ghost ships and phantom islands offered frameworks for understanding optical illusions and unusual weather conditions that sailors might encounter. Newfoundland fishing communities developed their own distinctive storytelling traditions that combined British and Irish influences with experiences specific to North Atlantic fishing conditions. These stories often focused on survival themes, celebrating the resourcefulness and courage required to make livings in harsh maritime environments. They preserved detailed knowledge about local geography, weather patterns, and fishing techniques, while also creating shared cultural frameworks for understanding community history and values. Pacific Island. Cultures maintained sophisticated oral traditions that preserved navigation knowledge, historical information, and spiritual teachings through musical performance and storytelling. These traditions weren't simply entertainment, but educational systems that transmitted essential cultural knowledge across generations without written records. Navigation chants included precise information about star positions, ocean currents, and island locations encoded in musical forms that could be accurately memorized and transmitted. The cultural importance of these oral traditions meant that master storytellers and musicians held important social positions in maritime communities. They weren't just entertainers, but cultural guardians, responsible for preserving and transmitting knowledge essential for community survival. Learning these traditions required years of training and demonstrated both memory skills and understanding of the cultural contexts that gave stories their meanings. Modern recording technology has allowed scholars to document traditional maritime music and stories that might otherwise have been lost as traditional fishing communities decline in maritime work becomes increasingly mechanized. These recordings reveal the sophistication of oral traditions that preserved complex information systems without written support, demonstrating the importance of music and storytelling as cultural technologies for knowledge transmission. Contemporary. Maritime music continues to draw inspiration from traditional forms, while also addressing modern oceanic concerns. Folk revival movements have preserved and adapted traditional sea shanties for contemporary performance contexts. While new songs address current issues like overfishing, marine pollution, and climate change, singer-songwriters in coastal communities often draw on traditional musical forms to explore contemporary relationships with the sea. Electronic music has found in ocean sounds rich sources of inspiration, using recordings of waves, wind, and marine life as compositional elements in ambient and experimental works. These contemporary compositions often aim to recreate the meditative and transformative experiences that humans have found in oceanic environments, using modern technology to capture and transmit the psychological effects of sea soundscapes. Film and television music has developed elaborate conventions for oceanic scoring, using specific musical techniques to evoke different aspects of maritime experience. Composers have learned to use orchestral colors and rhythmic patterns that suggest wave motion, create tension appropriate to storm scenes, or evoke the vastness and mystery of deep ocean environments. These musical techniques have become so standardized that audiences immediately recognize their oceanic associations. What connects traditional sea shanties with contemporary oceanic music is their shared recognition of the sea's fundamental rhythmic character. Ocean environments seem to naturally generate musical responses, encouraging humans to create sounds that match and complement the sea's own acoustic patterns. This musical relationship with oceanic environments represents one of humanity's deepest and most enduring cultural connections with the sea along the world's coastlines. Where land meets sea in an ever-changing dance of tides and seasons, some of humanity's most remarkable civilizations have flourished. These coastal cultures developed unique ways of life that drew from both terrestrial and marine resources, creating societies that were neither fully land-based nor entirely maritime, but something altogether new, amphibious civilizations that lived in the productive tension between two worlds. Venice stands as perhaps the most extraordinary example of a civilization built literally between land and sea. Rising from a collection of marshy islands in the Adriatic Lagoon, Venice created an urban form unlike anything seen before or since. The city's founders, refugees from barbarian invasions of the Italian mainland, discovered that the shallow lagoon waters provided both protection from land-based armies and access to maritime trade routes that would eventually span the known world. Venetian civilization required entirely new approaches to urban planning and architecture. Streets became canals, horses were replaced by boats, building foundations had to be driven deep into lagoon mud on wooden pilings that have supported magnificent palaces for more than 1,000 years. The city developed its own unique building techniques, using materials and methods specifically adapted to the challenges of construction in a tidal environment. But Venice's greatest innovation was perhaps social and economic rather than purely architectural. The city created new forms of government and commerce specifically designed for a trading republic, dependent on maritime connections. Venetian merchants developed sophisticated banking and insurance systems that could manage the risks of long-distance trade, while Venetian diplomats pioneered new approaches to international relations that balanced competing interests among multiple trading partners. The wealth that flowed through Venice from its position at the crossroads of European and Asian trade allowed the city to become a patron of arts and learning on an unprecedented scale. Venetian artists developed new painting techniques inspired by the unique quality of light reflected off lagoon waters. Venetian architects created building styles that combined Byzantine, Islamic, and European influences, reflecting the cosmopolitan character of a city that served as a meeting point for multiple civilizations. Other coastal civilizations developed their own distinctive solutions to the challenges of living between land and sea. The Minoan civilization of ancient Crete created a maritime culture that combined sophisticated naval technology with elaborate palace complexes that served as centers for both religious ceremony and commercial administration. Minoan frescoes depicting dolphins and marine life suggest a society that found aesthetic and spiritual inspiration in oceanic environments. While archaeological evidence reveals extensive trade networks that connected Crete with Egypt, Anatolia, and the Greek mainland, the Phoenician cities of the Eastern Mediterranean developed a different model of coastal civilization, one that emphasized mobility and adaptation over permanent settlement. Phoenician traders established colonies and trading posts throughout the Mediterranean, creating a network of related communities that shared cultural practices and commercial interests. While adapting to local conditions in different regions, this approach allowed Phoenician civilization to spread and persist even when individual cities were conquered or destroyed in Southeast Asia. The Srivijaya kingdom created a maritime empire that controlled sea routes between India and China. For several centuries, it's based in Sumatra, but extending throughout the Indonesian archipelago, Srivijaya developed a decentralized form of governance that recognized the realities of ruling territories scattered across thousands of islands. The kingdom's power depended on naval control of strategic straits and harbors rather than territorial conquest, creating a distinctly oceanic form of political organization. Island civilizations faced particular challenges in developing sustainable relationships with limited terrestrial resources while maintaining connections with larger oceanic networks. Japan's island geography forced its civilization to become highly efficient in resource use while also maintaining careful relationships with continental neighbors. Japanese culture developed distinctive aesthetic and spiritual traditions that reflected both the beauty and the constraints of island existence, emphasizing simplicity, seasonal awareness, and careful attention to natural cycles. The Pacific Islands supported numerous civilizations that developed remarkable technologies for ocean travel and navigation despite limited terrestrial resources. Hawaiian civilization created complex social and political systems that coordinated resource use across multiple islands, while also maintaining the canoe building and navigation skills necessary for interland travel. The elaborate featherwork and artistic traditions that developed in Hawaii reflected both the island's biological uniqueness and their connections to broader Polynesian cultural networks. Caribbean civilizations developed their own approaches to island life, creating societies that combined agriculture, fishing, and interland trade and sustainable systems that supported relatively dense populations on limited land areas. The Taino people developed sophisticated techniques for cultivating root crops in tropical island environments, while also maintaining extensive trade networks that connected islands. Throughout the Caribbean region, what characterized all successful coastal civilizations was their ability to think systemically about the relationships between terrestrial and marine resources, developing technologies and social practices that could exploit the productivity of coastal margins while managing the risks associated with oceanic environments. These civilizations typically developed more flexible and adaptive social structures than purely land-based societies. recognizing that survival at the ocean's edge required the ability to respond quickly to changing conditions. Coastal civilizations also tended to be more cosmopolitan and culturally diverse than inland societies, reflecting their roles as meeting points for different peoples and trading networks. The necessity of dealing with foreign traders and travelers encouraged the development of diplomatic skills, foreign language abilities, and cultural tolerance that often made coastal cities centers of learning and innovation. The decline of coastal civilizations often reflected changing oceanic conditions or shifting trade patterns rather than simple conquest or internal decay. Venice's decline began when Atlantic trade routes reduced Mediterranean commerce, while various Pacific island civilizations were disrupted by European diseases and colonial interventions that broke traditional resource management systems. Understanding these historical patterns provides important lessons for contemporary coastal communities. Facing new challenges from climate change and economic globalization, port cities have always been different from other urban centers, serving not just as economic hubs, but as cultural crossroads where people, ideas, and traditions from distant lands encounter and influence each other. These cosmopolitan environments have generated some of history's most creative cultural developments, producing hybrid societies that combine elements from multiple traditions while also creating entirely new forms of art, cuisine, language, and social organization. Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great at the mouth of the Nile, became the archetypal example of a cosmopolitan port city. Its famous library and museum attracted scholars from throughout the Mediterranean world, while its harbors handled trade goods from as far away as India and Scandinavia. The city's population included Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, Phoenicians, and representatives of dozens of other cultures, creating a social environment that encouraged intellectual exchange and cultural innovation. Alexandrian scholars made fundamental contributions to mathematics, astronomy, geography, and medicine. Drawing on knowledge traditions from multiple civilizations, the city's position at the intersection of African, Asian, and European trade routes provided access to intellectual resources that would have been impossible in more isolated locations. At the same time, the practical challenges of governing such a diverse population encouraged the development of new approaches to law, administration, and social organization that would influence urban development throughout the ancient world. The linguistic environment of Alexandria illustrates the complex cultural dynamics typical of major port cities. While Greek served as the primary administrative and scholarly language, the streets of Alexandria rang with Egyptian, Hebrew, Arabic, and numerous other languages. This multilingual environment encouraged the development of translation practices and cross-cultural communication, skills that facilitated both commercial and intellectual exchange. Medieval and early modern Islamic port cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Istanbul created their own distinctive forms of cosmopolitan culture. Combining Islamic civilization with influences from the various peoples who came to trade or settle in these commercial centers, these cities often became centers of learning and artistic innovation, attracting scholars, artists, and craftspeople from throughout the Islamic world and beyond. The Ottoman Empire's control of strategic ports like Istanbul and Izmir created urban environments that brought together Muslims, Christians, and Jews from Europe, Asia, and Africa. These cities developed complex social systems that allowed different religious and ethnic communities to maintain their distinctive practices while also participating in shared commercial and cultural activities. The architectural legacy of Ottoman port cities reflects this cultural diversity, combining Islamic, Byzantine, and European influences in distinctive hybrid styles. European colonial expansion created new types of port cities in regions that had previously had limited contact with European civilization. Cities like Mumbai, Bombay, Singapore, and Hong Kong became hybrid environments where European colonial administrations interacted with existing Asian trading networks, creating unique cultural combinations that persist to the present day. Mumbai's development under British colonial rule illustrates both the opportunities and tensions inherent in colonial port cities. The city's position on India's west coast made it a natural center for trade with the Middle East and Europe, while its deep natural harbor could accommodate the largest ships of the era. British investment in port facilities and railway connections made Mumbai India's primary commercial gateway, attracting migrants from throughout the subcontinent and creating one of the world's most linguistically and culturally diverse cities. Cultural ferment of colonial Mumbai produced new forms of art, literature, and cinema that combined European techniques with Indian aesthetic traditions. Bollywood, India's film industry, emerged from this cosmopolitan environment, creating entertainment that could appeal to audiences throughout India, despite their diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds. Similarly, Mumbai's textile industry combined European industrial technology with traditional Indian design traditions, producing products that found markets both within India and internationally. San Francisco represents an example of how port cities could develop rapidly in response to new economic opportunities. The California gold rush transformed San Francisco from a small Spanish colonial settlement into one of the world's major ports within a few decades, attracting migrants from across America, Asia, and Latin America. This rapid growth created a highly diverse urban environment with distinctive neighborhoods. Reflecting different cultural traditions, San Francisco's Chinatown became one of the largest Chinese communities outside of China, while the city's Italian, Irish, and Mexican neighborhoods maintained their own cultural institutions and traditions. At the same time, the practical necessities of urban life encouraged cooperation across cultural boundaries, creating shared institutions and practices that helped integrate diverse populations into a functioning urban community. The earthquake and fire of 1906 provided an opportunity for San Francisco to rebuild itself with more conscious attention to urban planning and cultural integration. The city's reconstruction demonstrated how port cities could combine cultural diversity with functional urban design, creating environments that celebrated different traditions while also promoting social cohesion and economic cooperation. Contemporary port cities continue to serve as cultural crossroads. Now, the nature of cultural exchange has been transformed by modern transportation and communication technologies. Cities like Rotterdam, Dubai, and Singapore have become global centers for trade and finance, attracting migrants and visitors from throughout the world and creating new forms of cosmopolitan culture adapted to contemporary conditions. Dubai's rapid development as a global trading and tourism center illustrates how contemporary port cities can consciously cultivate cultural diversity as an economic strategy. The city's policies encouraging international business and tourism have created an urban environment where more than 80% of residents are foreign-born, representing virtually every country in the world. This cultural diversity has become both a source of economic vitality and a distinctive aspect of Dubai's identity as a global city. The challenges facing contemporary port cities include managing cultural tensions that can arise from rapid demographic change, maintaining distinctive local identities while also embracing international connections, and ensuring that the benefits of cosmopolitan development are shared broadly throughout urban populations. These challenges require new approaches to urban planning and governance that can balance the competing demands of economic growth, cultural preservation, and social equity. The unique challenges of building in coastal and maritime environments have inspired some of humanity's most ingenious architectural solutions. From lighthouses that must withstand the full fury of ocean storms, to floating cities that rise and fall with the tides, maritime architecture represents the intersection of engineering necessity and aesthetic vision, creating structures that are both functional and beautiful, both protective and inspiring. Lighthouses stand as perhaps the most iconic examples of maritime architecture, serving both practical and symbolic functions that extend far beyond their basic role as navigational aids.
Wow.
These towers must be tall enough to be visible from great distances, strong enough to withstand hurricane-force winds and massive waves, yet also distinctive enough to be recognizable to mariners approaching from different directions. The engineering challenges of lighthouse construction have pushed architects and builders to develop new techniques for building in exposed coastal locations, The Pharos of Alexandria, built in the 3rd century BCE, established many of the design principles that would influence lighthouse construction for centuries to come. Standing more than 400 feet tall, the Pharos was one of the tallest structures in the ancient world, visible to ships more than 30 miles offshore. Its construction required sophisticated understanding of foundation engineering, structural stability, and optical systems that could project light over great distances. Medieval lighthouse builders developed new techniques for constructing towers that could survive in harsh marine environments. The use of specially shaped stones that could interlock without mortar, the development of flexible foundations that could move with shifting ground, and the creation of internal structural systems that could distribute wind and wave loads throughout the entire tower. All of these innovations emerged from the practical demands of lighthouse construction. The aesthetic development of lighthouse design reflects the symbolic importance these structures held for maritime communities. Beyond their function as navigational aids, lighthouses served as symbols of safety, guidance, and human triumph over natural dangers. Lighthouse architects developed distinctive design languages that could communicate these symbolic meanings while also meeting strict functional requirements. Harbor architecture presents different challenges, requiring the construction of facilities that can accommodate ships of various sizes while also protecting them from storms and waves. Ancient harbor builders developed sophisticated techniques for creating protected anchorages, using combinations of natural geography and artificial construction to create safe havens for maritime commerce. The Roman port of Caesarea Maritima demonstrates the engineering ambitions of ancient harbor construction. Built on an exposed coastline with no natural protection, Caesarea required the construction of massive breakwaters that could create calm water in one of the Mediterranean's most challenging locations. Roman engineers used hydraulic concrete that could set underwater, allowing them to construct foundations and walls that could withstand constant wave action. Medieval harbor construction often focused on adapting existing coastal features rather than creating entirely artificial facilities. Builders learned to use tidal patterns to their advantage, creating harbors that could accommodate ships during high tide while providing dry docks for maintenance during low tide. These designs required sophisticated understanding of local tidal patterns and seasonal variations in water levels. The development of larger sailing ships during the Age of Exploration required new approaches to harbor design that could accommodate vessels with deeper drafts and greater beam measurements. Harbor engineers developed techniques for dredging deeper channels, constructing stronger wharfs, and creating facilities for the complex loading and unloading operations required by long-distance trading vessels. Residential architecture in maritime environments has developed its own distinctive characteristics, reflecting both the opportunities and constraints of coastal living. Coastal houses must be designed to withstand salt air, high winds, and potential flooding, while also taking advantage of ocean views and sea breezes. These functional requirements have generated distinctive architectural traditions that vary according to local climate conditions and cultural preferences. New England coastal architecture developed characteristic features like steep roofs for shedding snow, deep foundations for stability in sandy soil, and extensive use of local stone and timber that could withstand harsh weather conditions. The famous widow's walks on many coastal houses served both practical and symbolic functions, providing high vantage points for watching returning ships, while also expressing the anxiety and hope associated with maritime livelihoods. Caribbean coastal architecture adapted European building traditions to tropical maritime conditions, developing techniques for promoting air circulation, providing protection from hurricanes, and using local materials like coral stone and palm thatch. The raised foundations common in Caribbean coastal houses reflect both the need for flood protection and the desire to capture cooling breezes, while wide verandas provide outdoor living spaces protected from both sun and rain. Pacific Island architecture created distinctive solutions for building in environments with limited resources and extreme weather conditions. Traditional Pacific Island buildings often used flexible construction techniques that could bend with hurricane winds rather than resisting them. While elevated designs provided protection from storm surges and flooding, the use of local materials like bamboo and palm leaves created buildings that were both sustainable and perfectly adapted to tropical maritime climates. Contemporary maritime architecture continues to innovate in response to new challenges and opportunities. Climate change and rising sea levels are forcing architects to develop new approaches to coastal construction that can adapt to changing water levels and increased storm intensity. Floating buildings and amphibious designs that can rise and fall with water levels represent contemporary responses to these challenges. The Netherlands has become a world leader in developing architecture adapted to changing water levels, creating buildings that can float during floods while remaining connected to urban infrastructure systems. These innovations combine traditional Dutch expertise in water management with contemporary materials and construction techniques, creating prototypes for coastal architecture in an era of climate change. Offshore platform architecture represents an extreme extension of maritime building traditions, creating structures that must survive in deep ocean environments while providing safe living and working conditions for their inhabitants. These platforms must withstand waves, winds, and weather conditions that would destroy conventional buildings, while also providing all the facilities needed for extended human habitation far from shore. Modern coastal communities exist at the intersection of ancient maritime traditions and contemporary global forces, creating environments where traditional ways of life persist alongside modern tourism, industrial development, and technological innovation. These communities face unique challenges as they attempt to maintain their distinctive identities while adapting to rapidly changing economic and environmental conditions. Traditional fishing villages around the world continue to practice techniques and maintain social structures that have roots stretching back centuries, yet they must also adapt to modern regulations, global markets, and technological changes that have transformed the fishing industry. In many cases, communities that once depended entirely on local marine resources now find themselves part of global economic networks that connect their small harbors to markets and supply chains spanning multiple continents. The Portuguese fishing village of Nazari illustrates both the persistence and transformation of traditional coastal communities. The village's fishermen continue to use traditional techniques for launching boats through surf that would be impossible for conventional harbors, while their wives maintain ancient traditions for processing and marketing fish. Yet the community has also adapted to modern tourism, with visitors coming to watch the dramatic boat launches and sample traditional seafood prepared according to recipes passed down through generations. This adaptation to tourism represents one of the most common strategies contemporary coastal communities use to supplement declining fishing incomes. However, tourism also creates tensions within traditional communities. As outside visitors and investors change local economies and social structures, coastal communities must balance the economic benefits of tourism against the risks of losing their distinctive cultural identity and environmental quality. Maine's fishing communities provide examples of how North American coastal communities have adapted to changing economic conditions. Traditional lobster fishing continues to provide important economic benefits for many coastal towns, but community survival increasingly depends on diversifying into tourism, aquaculture, and other marine-related industries. Many communities have developed working waterfront policies designed to preserve space for traditional fishing activities while also allowing controlled tourism development. The gentrification of coastal communities represents another significant challenge facing traditional maritime communities. As coastal property becomes increasingly valuable for vacation homes and retirement communities, long-term residents often find themselves unable to afford housing in communities where their families have lived for generations. This economic pressure can destroy the social continuity that maintains traditional maritime knowledge and practices. Climate change poses additional challenges for coastal communities, as rising sea levels and increased storm intensity threaten both physical infrastructure and traditional ways of life. Communities that have successfully adapted to historical patterns of storms and flooding must now prepare for conditions that exceed anything in their collective memory. This requires combining traditional knowledge about coastal hazards with new scientific understanding about climate change impacts. Some coastal communities are pioneering innovative approaches to climate adaptation that could serve as models for other vulnerable areas. The Netherlands continues to lead in developing techniques for living with changing water levels, creating communities that can adapt to both gradual sea level rise and extreme flooding events. These approaches combine sophisticated engineering with flexible social and economic systems that can respond quickly to changing conditions. Pacific Island communities face particularly severe challenges from climate change, as rising sea levels and changing storm patterns threaten their continued habitability. Some island nations are already developing plans for relocating entire populations to other countries, while others are investing in adaptation strategies designed to preserve island communities despite changing conditions. These efforts require international cooperation and new approaches to sovereignty and citizenship that can accommodate climate-induced migration. Technological innovation is creating new opportunities for coastal communities while also disrupting traditional practices and social structures. GPS navigation and fish finders have made fishing safer and more efficient, but they have also reduced the importance of traditional navigation knowledge that once distinguished experienced fishermen from novices. Satellite communication allows coastal communities to maintain contact with broader economic and social networks, but it also exposes them to global economic fluctuations and cultural influences that can undermine local traditions. Aquaculture represents both an opportunity and a challenge for many coastal communities as wild fish stocks decline and demand for seafood continues to grow. Fish and shellfish farming can provide new economic opportunities for traditional fishing communities while also using their existing maritime knowledge and infrastructure. However, aquaculture also requires new technical knowledge and capital, investments that may not be accessible to all community members. The development of offshore renewable energy represents another potential opportunity for coastal communities as governments and corporations invest in wind and wave power projects. These developments can provide new employment opportunities for communities with maritime expertise, while also contributing to climate change mitigation efforts. However, they also raise questions about offshore space use and potential conflicts with traditional fishing activities. Conservation efforts designed to protect marine ecosystems can both benefit and challenge coastal communities, depending on how they are designed and implemented. Marine protected areas can help restore fish populations and improve long-term fishing prospects, but they can also restrict traditional fishing practices and reduce short-term economic opportunities. Successful marine conservation increasingly requires collaboration between scientists, government officials, and traditional fishing communities to develop approaches that can achieve environmental goals while also supporting community needs. Despite these challenges, many coastal communities demonstrate remarkable resilience and adaptability, developing creative solutions that allow them to maintain their maritime identity while adapting to changing conditions. The most successful adaptation strategies typically combine respect for traditional knowledge and practices with openness to beneficial innovations, creating hybrid approaches that preserve community values while improving economic and environmental sustainability. For most of human history, the oceans seemed inexhaustibly vast, capable of absorbing whatever humanity might put into it while continuing to provide endless bounty in return. This perception began to change dramatically in the latter half of the 20th century, as scientific research revealed the extent to which human activities were affecting marine ecosystems, ocean chemistry, and global climate patterns. Today, the sea faces a convergence of challenges that threaten its health and its ability to sustain both marine life and human societies that depend on oceanic resources. The scale of ocean pollution has reached levels that would have been unimaginable 2 earlier generations. Every minute, the equivalent of a garbage truck full of plastic enters the ocean, creating vast garbage patches in remote areas where currents concentrate floating debris. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch now covers an area larger than twice the size of Texas, yet it represents only the most visible manifestation of a pollution problem that affects every part of the ocean from surface waters to the deepest trenches. Tiny fragments of degraded plastic waste have been found in marine life throughout the ocean food web, from plankton to whales. These particles carry chemical pollutants that can accumulate in marine organisms and eventually reach human consumers of seafood. The full consequences of this contamination remain unclear, but scientists are increasingly concerned about the potential for widespread ecosystem disruption as microplastic concentrations continue to increase. Chemical pollution represents another major threat to ocean health, with agricultural runoff, industrial waste, and urban sewage creating dead zones, where marine life cannot survive. The Gulf of Mexico dead zone, created primarily by nutrient pollution from agricultural fertilizers carried by the Mississippi River, now covers an area roughly the size of New Jersey each summer. Similar dead zones have appeared in coastal waters around the world. It's typically in areas where human population and agricultural activity are most intense. These pollution problems are compounded by climate change effects that are altering ocean chemistry and temperature patterns in ways that stress marine ecosystems. Ocean acidification, caused by the absorption of excess atmospheric carbon dioxide, is making it difficult for shell-forming organisms like corals, mollusks, and some plankton to build and maintain their calcium carbonate structures. This acidification is proceeding faster than at any time in the past 300 million years, leaving marine ecosystems little time to adapt to changing conditions. Rising ocean temperatures are causing widespread coral bleaching events that can kill entire reef ecosystems within a matter of weeks. Coral reefs support approximately 25% of all marine species, despite covering less than 1% of the ocean floor, making their destruction a biodiversity crisis of global proportions. The economic value of coral reefs for tourism, fishing, coastal protection is estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars annually, making their loss not just an environmental tragedy, but an economic disaster for tropical coastal communities. Overfishing represents another critical threat to ocean health, with many commercial fish stocks depleted to levels that threaten their long-term sustainability. Large predatory fish like tuna, sharks, and billfish have experienced population declines of more than 90% from historical levels, disrupting marine food webs in ways that scientists are still working to understand. The collapse of these top predator populations has allowed smaller fish and invertebrate populations to expand in ways that may make ecosystem recovery more difficult. Industrial fishing methods have become so efficient that they can rapidly deplete fish stocks before management systems can respond with appropriate regulations. Bottom trawling, which involves dragging heavy nets across the seafloor, destroys habitat while catching fish, creating environmental damage that can persist for decades. Bycatch, the unintended capture of non-target species, kills millions of marine animals annually, including endangered species like sea turtles, marine mammals, and seabirds. The social and economic consequences of fisheries collapse extend far beyond environmental concerns, affecting the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people worldwide who depend on fishing for their income and food security. Traditional fishing communities that have sustained themselves for generations find their way of life threatened by the depletion of marine resources they once considered inexhaustible. Shipping-related pollution presents additional challenges for ocean health, including oil spills, ballast water discharge that spreads invasive species, and noise pollution that interferes with marine mammal communication and navigation. The expansion of global trade has increased shipping traffic in previously pristine ocean areas, extending human impacts to regions that were once largely unaffected by industrial activity. Coastal development has destroyed or degraded many of the marine habitats that serve as nurseries for fish and other marine life. Mangrove forests, salt marshes, and seagrass beds that once filtered pollutants and provided habitat for juvenile marine organisms have been converted to urban development, aquaculture facilities, or other human uses. The loss of these coastal ecosystems reduces the ocean's capacity to maintain water quality and support marine biodiversity. Perhaps most troubling is the way these various threats interact with each other to create compound effects that may be greater than the sum of their individual impacts. Marine organisms stressed by pollution may be more vulnerable to disease outbreaks, while climate change effects like ocean acidification may make it more difficult for ecosystems to recover from fishing pressure or habitat destruction. The psychological impact of learning about ocean crisis can be overwhelming, particularly for people who feel deep emotional connections to marine environments. The concept of solastalgia, distress caused by environmental change in one's home environment, applies particularly strongly to coastal communities watching familiar marine ecosystems degrade or disappear. This emotional dimension of ocean crisis is often overlooked in scientific and policy discussions, yet it represents an important aspect of the human costs associated with marine environmental degradation. Despite the overwhelming challenges facing ocean health, conservation efforts around the world demonstrate both the possibility of marine ecosystem recovery and the power of human cooperation to address environmental problems. These efforts range from local community initiatives to international agreements, from technological innovations to changes in consumer behavior, all united by recognition that ocean health and human welfare are inextricably connected. Marine protected areas (MPAs) represent one of the most important tools for ocean conservation, creating zones where human activities are restricted or eliminated. To allow marine ecosystems to recover from fishing pressure and other impacts, when properly designed and enforced, MPAs can produce remarkable results, with fish populations often doubling or tripling within a few years of protection. These recovery zones can also serve as sources of larvae and juvenile fish that help restore populations in surrounding areas. The success of MPAs depends heavily on community support and involvement in their design and management. The most effective protected areas are typically those that incorporate local knowledge and provide alternative economic opportunities for communities that previously depended on extractive activities within the protected zones. This approach recognizes that conservation success requires addressing human social and economic needs as well as ecological protection goals. The Papanomokokea Marine National Monument in Hawaii demonstrates how large-scale marine protection can be achieved through collaboration between government agencies, scientific institutions, and Native Hawaiian communities. Covering more than 580,000 square miles of ocean, the monument protects pristine coral reefs, critical habitat for endangered species, and sites of cultural significance to Native Hawaiian traditions. The monument's management incorporates both Western scientific methods and traditional Hawaiian knowledge systems, creating a model for culturally inclusive conservation. International cooperation has become increasingly important for ocean conservation. As scientists have documented the global scale of marine ecosystem connections, migratory species like whales, tuna, and sea turtles cross multiple national boundaries during their life cycles, requiring coordinated management efforts among different countries to ensure their protection. International agreements like CITES Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species have helped reduce pressure on endangered marine species by regulating or eliminating commercial trade. The development of sustainable fishing practices represents another critical component of ocean conservation efforts. These approaches aim to maintain fish populations at levels that can support long-term harvesting, while also preserving the ecological functions that fish serve in marine ecosystems. Sustainable fishing requires sophisticated understanding of fish population dynamics, ecosystem relationships, and the cumulative effects of multiple fishing activities. Certification programs like the Marine Stewardship Council have created market incentives for sustainable fishing by allowing consumers to identify and choose seafood products that meet environmental standards. These programs work by creating economic advantages for fishing operations that adopt sustainable practices while also educating consumers about the UHR, environmental implications of their seafood choices. Technological innovation has created new tools for ocean conservation, including satellite monitoring systems that can track illegal fishing activities, underwater robots that can monitor ecosystem health in remote areas, and genetic techniques that can help scientists understand population structure and ecosystem relationships. These technologies allow conservation efforts to operate at scales and in environments that would have been impossible with traditional methods. Restoration efforts have demonstrated the possibility of actively repairing damaged marine ecosystems, rather than simply protecting existing healthy areas. Coral restoration projects use techniques like coral gardening and artificial reef construction to rebuild coral communities that have been damaged by bleaching, disease, or physical destruction. While these efforts are still experimental and expensive, they offer hope for recovering ecosystems that might otherwise be lost permanently. Oyster restoration. Projects in places like Chesapeake Bay have shown how restoring key species can improve overall ecosystem health, while also providing economic benefits through improved water quality and restored fisheries. Oysters filter large quantities of water as they feed, removing pollutants and excess nutrients that can cause algal blooms in dead zones. Restored oyster populations can significantly improve water quality while also providing habitat for other marine species. Community-based conservation initiatives often achieve remarkable results by combining local knowledge with outside technical and financial support. These programs recognize that people who live and work in marine environments often have detailed understanding of local ecosystem patterns and changes, knowledge that can be invaluable for designing effective conservation strategies. When combined with scientific research and policy support, community-based conservation can create sustainable solutions that address both environmental and human needs. Education and outreach efforts play crucial roles in ocean conservation by building public understanding and support for marine protection efforts. Ocean literacy programs help people understand the connections between human activities and ocean health, while citizen science projects allow volunteers to contribute to marine research and monitoring efforts. These programs create constituencies for conservation while also generating valuable scientific information. The blue economy concept represents an emerging approach to ocean conservation that seeks to align economic development with environmental protection. This approach recognizes that human dependence on ocean resources creates incentives for maintaining ocean health, but it also emphasizes the need for economic activities that can provide sustainable livelihoods without damaging marine ecosystems. Blue economy initiatives include sustainable aquaculture, tourism, and renewable energy projects that can generate economic benefits while contributing to conservation goals. Climate change mitigation efforts present perhaps the most important long-term strategy for ocean conservation. Since many of the threats facing marine ecosystems are directly related to greenhouse gas emissions and global warming, ocean-based solutions like protecting and restoring coastal wetlands can contribute to climate mitigation while also providing coastal protection and marine habitat benefits. The transformation of coastal areas into destinations for tourism and recreation represents one of the most significant changes in human relationships with the sea during the modern era. What was once the exclusive domain of working fishermen, mariners, and coastal residents has become accessible to millions of people who come to the ocean seeking relaxation, adventure, and connection with marine environments. This democratization of ocean access has created new economic opportunities and cultural experiences, but it has also generated new challenges for both environmental protection and coastal community preservation. The beach vacation phenomenon emerged during the 19th century as improved transportation and growing middle class prosperity made coastal travel accessible to broader populations. Early beach resorts like Brighton in England and Atlantic City in New Jersey pioneered the concept of the seaside holiday, creating new forms of architecture, entertainment, and social interaction designed specifically for temporary visitors. Rather than permanent coastal residents, the development of beach tourism required fundamental changes in cultural attitudes toward the ocean and coastal environments. While earlier generations had often viewed the sea as dangerous and inhospitable, beach tourism promoted images of the ocean as healthful, recreational, and aesthetically pleasing. This shift in perception was supported by medical theories about the therapeutic benefits of sea air and saltwater, as well as romantic, artistic, and literary traditions that celebrated the beauty and sublimity of coastal landscapes. The growth of automobile ownership and airline travel during the 20th century made coastal tourism accessible to increasingly broad populations, transforming entire coastal regions into tourist destinations. The Florida coast evolved from a largely uninhabited wilderness into a major tourist destination within a few decades. While Mediterranean coastal areas became accessible to Northern European tourists seeking warmer climates and beach experiences, unavailable in their home countries, this transformation created new economic opportunities for coastal regions, but also generated conflicts. Between tourism development and traditional coastal activities, fishing harbors were converted into marina facilities for recreational boaters, while waterfront areas that had previously been working spaces became scenic amenities for tourist consumption. These changes often displaced traditional coastal communities while creating new service economies centered on hospitality and recreation. Cruise tourism represents an extreme form of oceanic recreation that allows passengers to experience multiple coastal destinations without the complexities of independent travel. Modern cruise ships are essentially floating cities that can accommodate thousands of passengers while providing entertainment, dining, and recreational facilities comparable to land-based resorts. These vessels have become so large and sophisticated that the oceanic journey itself is often secondary to the onboard experience. The growth of cruise tourism has created new challenges for both environmental protection and destination management. Large cruise ships generate significant amounts of waste and pollution, while their passenger loads can overwhelm small coastal communities that lack the infrastructure to accommodate thousands of visitors arriving simultaneously. Some destinations have implemented restrictions on cruise ship visits to protect both environmental quality and community character. Water sports and recreational boating have created new forms of interaction with marine environments that combine physical activity with ocean access. Surfing, which originated in Hawaiian and Polynesian cultures, has become a global phenomenon that celebrates the power and beauty of ocean waves, while requiring intimate knowledge of local water conditions. Scuba diving and snorkeling have made underwater environments accessible to recreational visitors, creating new appreciation for marine biodiversity, while also generating economic incentives for marine conservation. The growth of recreational fishing has complicated traditional relationships between commercial fishermen and marine resources. Sport fishing often targets the same species pursued by commercial fishermen, creating competition for limited fish populations. However, recreational fishing also creates economic value for fish populations that remains even when commercial fishing becomes uneconomical, providing alternative justifications for fisheries. Conservation efforts. Whale watching has emerged as a major form of marine tourism that directly benefits from conservation efforts while also creating economic incentives for marine mammal protection. Communities that previously hunted whales or had limited interaction with these animals have developed tourist economies based on observing and photographing whales in their natural habitats. This shift demonstrates how conservation efforts can create new economic opportunities while also protecting endangered species. The development of coastal tourism. Infrastructure has often occurred with limited attention to environmental impacts or long-term sustainability. Beachfront development can damage dune systems and coastal vegetation that provide natural protection from storms and erosion. Marina construction can disturb shallow water habitats that serve as nurseries for marine life. The cumulative effects of tourism development can degrade the very environmental qualities that attract visitors in the first place. Climate change poses new challenges for coastal tourism as rising sea levels increase storm intensity and changing weather patterns affect both tourism infrastructure and visitor experiences. Beach erosion threatens coastal resorts, while coral bleaching events can damage the underwater attractions that support diving and snorkeling tourism. These changes are forcing tourism operators to develop adaptation strategies that can maintain visitor experiences despite changing environmental conditions. Sustainable tourism approaches attempt to balance visitor access with environmental protection and community needs. These strategies often involve limiting visitor numbers, implementing environmental impact mitigation measures, and ensuring that tourism revenues contribute to conservation efforts and community development. Ecotourism represents one approach. that explicitly combines recreation with environmental education and conservation support. The COVID-19 pandemic provided an unexpected experiment in the effects of reduced tourism on coastal and marine environments. The dramatic reduction in cruise ship traffic and beach tourism allowed scientists to observe how marine ecosystems respond to reduced human pressure. In many cases, the results were remarkably positive, with improved water quality, increased wildlife activity, and reduced noise pollution in areas that had experienced intensive tourism pressure. Virtual reality and remote sensing technologies are beginning to create new possibilities for ocean recreation that don't require physical travel to coastal areas. These technologies can provide immersive experiences of underwater environments or remote oceanic locations while reducing the environmental impacts associated with tourism, transportation, and infrastructure. While virtual experiences cannot completely replace physical interaction with marine environments, they may provide alternatives that can help reduce pressure on the most sensitive or overcrowded oceanic destinations. The modern era of ocean science has revealed that the sea remains Earth's greatest frontier, containing more unexplored territory and undiscovered species than all terrestrial environments combined. Recent technological advances have made it possible to explore oceanic environments that were previously completely inaccessible, leading to discoveries that have revolutionized understanding of life on Earth, climate systems, and the geological processes that shape our planet. This new knowledge has profound implications for how humanity understands its relationship with the sea and manages its impacts on marine environments. Deep sea exploration has revealed ecosystems that operate according to principles completely different from those governing surface environments. Hydrothermal vent communities discovered in the 1970s demonstrated that life could exist without sunlight, deriving energy from chemical processes rather than photosynthesis. These discoveries forced scientists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the conditions necessary for life and suggested possibilities for life on other planets, where similar conditions might exist. The organisms found around hydrothermal vents include bacteria, tube worms, crabs, and fish that have evolved extraordinary adaptations for surviving in environments with extreme temperatures, crushing pressure, and toxic chemical concentrations. Many of these organisms have no close relatives in surface environments, representing evolutionary lineages that have been isolated in deep-sea environments for millions of years. The study of these organisms has provided insights into early evolutionary processes and the biochemical strategies that life uses to survive in extreme conditions. Submersible technology has made it possible for humans to directly observe deep-sea environments and collect samples with unprecedented precision. Research submersibles like Alvin have allowed scientists to conduct detailed studies of seafloor geology, collect samples of previously unknown organisms, and observe animal behaviors that cannot be studied through remote sensing alone. These direct observations have been crucial for understanding ecosystem processes that occur at depths where pressure would immediately kill unprotected humans. Remote sensing technologies have expanded the scale and scope of ocean research far beyond what is possible through direct observation. Satellite measurements can monitor ocean temperature, chlorophyll concentration, and sea level changes across the entire planet with daily coverage, providing datasets that would be impossible to collect through ship-based research alone. These global observations have been essential for understanding how oceanic processes affect global climate and how climate change is altering ocean systems. Autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, remotely operated vehicles or OVS have made it possible to explore ocean areas that are too dangerous or remote for human-occupied vehicles. These robots can operate continuously for months at a time, collecting data from ocean areas that experience severe weather, sea ice, or other conditions that would prevent human access. They have been particularly valuable for studying polar ocean regions and deep-sea environments where the costs and risks of human-occupied research would be prohibitive. Genomic sequencing technologies have revolutionized understanding of marine biodiversity by making it possible to identify and study organisms that cannot be cultured in laboratory conditions. Environmental DNA sampling allows scientists to detect the presence of marine organisms by analyzing water samples for genetic material, providing new methods for monitoring ecosystem health and discovering new species. These techniques have revealed that marine environments contain far more biodiversity than previously suspected. With many ecosystems harboring thousands of previously unknown microbial species, ocean drilling projects have provided unprecedented insights into Earth's climate history by recovering sediment cores that preserve records of past oceanic and atmospheric conditions. These cores contain fossilized remains of marine organisms, chemical signatures of ancient ocean conditions, and evidence of past climate changes that help scientists understand how Earth's climate system has evolved over millions of years. This paleoclimatic data has been crucial for understanding natural climate variability and predicting how current climate changes might affect ocean systems. The development of global ocean observation networks has created new possibilities for understanding oceanic processes on planetary scales. Arrays of instrumented buoys, underwater sensors, and satellite systems now provide real-time data on ocean temperature, salinity, currents, and biological activity from all parts of the world's oceans. This global monitoring network has been essential for detecting and understanding large-scale ocean changes associated with climate change, El Niño events, other phenomena that affect global weather patterns. Marine biotechnology research has discovered that ocean organisms produce chemical compounds with remarkable properties that have potential applications in medicine, materials, science, and other fields. Many marine organisms produce antibiotics, anti-cancer compounds, and other bioactive molecules as defenses against predators or pathogens. The study of these natural products has led to the development of new pharmaceuticals and biomaterials, while also providing insights into the biochemical strategies that marine organisms use for survival. Ocean acidification research has emerged as a critical area of study as scientists work to understand how changing ocean chemistry affects marine ecosystems. Laboratory and field experiments have documented how acidification affects shell-building organisms, coral reefs, and marine food webs, while modeling studies attempt to predict future changes and their ecological consequences. This research is crucial for developing strategies to protect marine ecosystems from one of the most pervasive effects of increased atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations. Fisheries science has evolved to incorporate ecosystem-based approaches that consider the complex interactions between fish populations, their prey species, habitat requirements, and human fishing activities. These approaches require sophisticated understanding of marine food webs, population dynamics, and the cumulative effects of multiple human impacts on marine ecosystems. Modern fisheries management increasingly relies on scientific assessment methods that can provide advice for maintaining fish populations while also considering broader ecosystem health. Citizen science programs have created new opportunities for public participation in ocean research while also generating valuable scientific data. Programs like coral reef monitoring, beach cleanup data collection, and marine mammal sighting networks allow volunteers to contribute to scientific research, while also learning about ocean environments and conservation challenges. These programs help bridge the gap between scientific research and public understanding, while also expanding the geographic and temporal scope of ocean monitoring efforts. The integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies is beginning to transform ocean research by making it possible to analyze enormous datasets and identify patterns that would be impossible for humans to detect through conventional analysis methods. These technologies can process satellite imagery to track changes in ocean conditions, analyze underwater video to identify and count marine organisms, and integrate multiple types of data to model complex ecosystem processes. As these technologies continue to develop, they promise to accelerate the pace of ocean discovery, while also improving our ability to monitor and protect marine environments as humanity enters an era of unprecedented technological capability and environmental awareness. The future of our relationship with the ocean will be shaped by our ability to develop forms of ocean use that can meet human needs while maintaining the health and productivity of marine ecosystems. This challenge requires fundamental changes in how we think about the ocean, not as an inexhaustible resource to be exploited, but as a complex system that requires careful stewardship to continue providing the services that both humans and other species depend upon. The concept of the blue economy represents an emerging framework for sustainable ocean use that seeks to align economic development with environmental protection. Unlike traditional approaches that treat environmental protection and economic development as competing goals, blue economy strategies attempt to create economic value through activities that maintain or improve ocean health. This approach recognizes that healthy marine ecosystems provide valuable services: carbon storage, coastal protection, nutrient cycling, and biodiversity conservation that have real economic value, even if they are not captured in traditional market transactions. Sustainable aquaculture represents one of the most promising areas for blue economy development, offering the potential to produce large quantities of protein with lower environmental impacts than terrestrial animal agriculture. Marine aquaculture can utilize ocean space that is unsuitable for other economic activities, while potentially reducing pressure on wild fish stocks that have been depleted by overfishing. However, realizing this potential requires developing aquaculture systems that minimize pollution, disease transmission, and habitat destruction while maximizing production efficiency. Integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, IMTA, represents an innovative approach that combines the cultivation of different species in ways that create beneficial interactions rather than competition for resources. These systems might combine fish farming with seaweed cultivation and shellfish production, creating polycultures where the waste products from one species provide nutrients for others. Such integrated systems can be more productive and environmentally sustainable than single-species aquaculture, while also providing more diverse products for human consumption. Offshore renewable energy development offers enormous potential for meeting growing global energy demands while reducing greenhouse gas emissions that threaten ocean health through climate change. Ocean winds are typically stronger and more consistent than land-based winds, while wave and tidal energy sources provide predictable power generation that could complement variable solar and wind resources. However, offshore energy development must be carefully planned to minimize impacts on marine ecosystems and existing ocean uses like fishing and shipping. Floating offshore wind platforms represent a particularly promising technology that could allow renewable energy development in deep ocean areas where conventional fixed-bottom turbines are not feasible. These platforms could access the strongest and most consistent ocean winds while avoiding conflicts with coastal communities and nearshore ecosystems. As this technology matures, it could provide clean energy for coastal communities, while also creating new economic opportunities for maritime workers and coastal industries. Ocean thermal energy conversion, OTEC, represents another renewable energy technology that could provide clean power for tropical island communities, while also producing fresh water through desalination. OTEC systems use temperature differences between surface and deep ocean waters to generate electricity, a resource that is available continuously in tropical areas. While OTEC technology is still in early development phases, it could eventually provide sustainable energy and water resources for island communities that currently depend on imported fossil fuels. Sustainable fishing practices will remain crucial for maintaining ocean productivity while meeting growing global demand for seafood. This will likely require continued development of selective fishing gear that reduces bycatch, improved monitoring systems that can prevent overfishing, and ecosystem-based management approaches that consider the broader environmental effects of fishing activities. Technological innovations like real-time fish stock monitoring and automated fishing systems could help optimize fishing efficiency while reducing environmental impacts. Marine biotechnology offers potential for developing new products and processes based on the unique properties of marine organisms. The extreme conditions found in ocean environments have led to the evolution of organisms with remarkable biochemical capabilities that could be applied to medical treatments, industrial processes, and environmental remediation. Sustainable biotechnology development will require techniques for studying and utilizing these resources without damaging the ecosystems that produce them. Shipping and transportation will likely become increasingly important for global trade as economies continue to integrate, but these activities must become more environmentally sustainable to avoid further degrading ocean health. This will likely require development of cleaner fuels and more efficient engines, better ballast water treatment systems to prevent the spread of invasive species, and routing systems that minimize impacts on marine mammal migrations and sensitive ecosystems. Circular economy principles applied to ocean use could help minimize waste and maximize resource efficiency in marine industries. These approaches emphasize reusing and recycling materials rather than disposing of them as waste, reducing the flow of pollutants into ocean environments while also reducing the need for raw material extraction. Marine industries could potentially achieve closed-loop systems where all waste products become inputs for other processes. Ocean restoration and conservation could become significant economic sectors as the value of healthy marine ecosystems becomes better recognized and compensated. Payment for ecosystem services programs could provide income for communities that maintain or restore marine habitats, while conservation finance mechanisms could fund large-scale restoration projects with measurable environmental and economic benefits. These approaches could create new livelihoods for coastal communities while also contributing to ocean health. Climate change is already altering ocean systems in fundamental ways, and these changes will accelerate in the coming decades regardless of mitigation efforts. Rising sea levels, changing storm patterns, ocean acidification, and shifting marine ecosystems will require unprecedented adaptation efforts by both human communities and natural systems. The success of these adaptation efforts will largely determine the future viability of coastal civilizations and the millions of species that depend on marine environments. Sea level rise represents one of the most visible and immediate challenges facing coastal communities, with implications that extend far beyond simple flooding. Current projections suggest that global sea levels could rise by several feet within this century, with much larger increases possible if major ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica experience rapid collapse. Even modest sea level rise will require extensive adaptation efforts to protect coastal infrastructure. Agricultural areas, communities, managed retreat will likely become necessary for some coastal areas that become too vulnerable or expensive to protect through engineering solutions. This process involves the planned relocation of people, infrastructure, and economic activities away from areas that are becoming uninhabitable due to sea level rise and increased flooding. Successful managed retreat requires careful planning to ensure that displaced communities maintain their social cohesion and economic viability, while also preserving important cultural and historical resources. Nature-based adaptation solutions offer promising approaches for coastal protection that can provide multiple benefits. While working with natural processes rather than against them, living shorelines that use oyster reefs, salt marshes, and mangrove forests can provide coastal protection while also supporting marine biodiversity and carbon sequestration. These natural systems are often more resilient and cost-effective than traditional hard engineering approaches, and they can adapt to changing conditions in ways that rigid structures cannot. Floating and amphibious architecture represents another adaptation strategy that allows communities to remain in coastal areas while adapting to changing water levels. These approaches, pioneered in countries like the Netherlands and Bangladesh, create buildings and infrastructure that can rise and fall with changing water levels while maintaining connections to utilities and transportation systems. Such technologies could allow coastal communities to maintain their maritime identity while adapting to new environmental conditions. Agricultural adaptation will be crucial for coastal communities as changing precipitation patterns and saltwater intrusion affect traditional farming systems. This may require developing new crop varieties that are more tolerant of salt and changing weather conditions. Implementing new irrigation and drainage systems that can handle variable water conditions, and potentially shifting to entirely different types of agriculture like aquaponics that can operate in modified coastal environments. Ocean acidification. Adaptation will require both technological and biological approaches to protect marine ecosystems and the human communities that depend on them. This might include developing more acid-tolerant varieties of commercially important shellfish, creating buffer zones where local actions can reduce acidification impacts, protecting areas where natural conditions provide refuge from acidification. Stress. Some communities may need to shift from activities that are vulnerable to acidification, like traditional shellfish farming, to alternatives that are more resilient to changing ocean chemistry. Fisheries adaptation will be necessary as changing ocean temperatures and ecosystem conditions alter the distribution and abundance of commercially important species. This will likely require developing more flexible fishing systems that can adapt to changing species availability, creating new markets for species that become more abundant as others decline, and potentially shifting to aquaculture systems that can provide more predictable production. Despite changing environmental conditions, climate-resilient infrastructure will be essential for maintaining economic and social systems. In coastal areas experiencing increased climate stress, this includes transportation systems that can function despite periodic flooding, energy systems that can withstand severe storms, and communication systems that can maintain connectivity during extreme weather events. Such infrastructure must be designed to accommodate not just current climate conditions, but also the range of future conditions that might occur as climate change continues. Early warning systems will become increasingly important for protecting coastal communities from climate-related hazards. These systems must be able to predict and communicate information about sea level changes, storm surge, coastal flooding, and other climate-related risks with enough advance notice to allow effective response. Modern warning systems can integrate satellite observations, ocean monitoring networks, and weather forecasting to provide increasingly accurate and timely information about approaching hazards. International cooperation will be essential for successful climate adaptation since climate change affects cross-national boundaries and require coordinated responses. This includes sharing of adaptation technologies and techniques, coordinated management of shared marine resources, and assistance. For communities that lack the resources needed for effective adaptation, climate migration will likely require new, international frameworks for supporting communities that are displaced by sea level rise and other climate impacts. Traditional knowledge systems developed by coastal communities over centuries provide valuable insights for climate adaptation strategies. Indigenous communities have often developed sophisticated understanding of local climate patterns and natural hazard management that can inform modern adaptation efforts. Integrating traditional knowledge with contemporary scientific understanding can create more effective and culturally appropriate adaptation strategies. Despite all the challenges facing ocean environments and coastal communities, the fundamental attraction between humans and the sea remains as strong as ever. This enduring relationship suggests that the future will not involve abandoning our connections with oceanic environments, but rather learning to maintain these connections in ways that are sustainable for both human communities and marine ecosystems. Understanding why the ocean continues to call to us may provide insights into how we can build better relationships with marine environments in the decades and centuries ahead. The psychological and spiritual benefits that humans derive from ocean environments appear to be deeply rooted in our evolutionary history and cultural development. Research in environmental psychology has documented the calming and restorative effects that many people experience when exposed to marine environments, effects that persist even in highly developed coastal areas. This suggests that maintaining human access to ocean environments may be important for psychological and social well-being, not just economic or recreational purposes. The concept of blue health has emerged to describe the ways that proximity to water environments can promote human physical and mental health. Studies have found associations between coastal living and lower rates of depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems, while also documenting the therapeutic benefits of activities like swimming, surfing, and simply spending time near water. Understanding these relationships could help inform urban planning and healthcare policies that maximize the health benefits of human-ocean connections. Ocean environments will likely become increasingly important for education and cultural development. As humanity grapples with complex environmental challenges that require sophisticated understanding of natural systems, marine environments offer unparalleled opportunities for learning about ecology, climate science, and sustainability in ways that connect abstract concepts with direct experience. Ocean education programs could help develop the environmental literacy needed for addressing contemporary conservation and sustainability challenges. The aesthetic and inspirational value of ocean environments continues to influence human creativity and cultural expression in ways that may become more rather than less important as societies become increasingly urbanized and technologically sophisticated. Artists, writers, musicians, and other creative individuals continue to find inspiration in marine environments, producing works that help others appreciate and understand the value of healthy oceans. This cultural production may be crucial for maintaining public support for ocean conservation efforts, technological developments, creating new possibilities for human interaction with ocean environments that could reduce environmental impacts, while maintaining meaningful connections. Virtual and augmented reality technologies can provide immersive experiences of underwater environments without the impacts associated with physical tourism. Underwater habitats and observation platforms could allow extended human presence in marine environments while minimizing disturbance to marine life. The development of sustainable ocean cities represents one possible future for human ocean relationships that could accommodate growing human populations while maintaining healthy marine ecosystems. These floating or partially submerged communities could be designed to integrate with marine environments rather than displacing them, potentially creating new forms of human settlement that enhance rather than degrade ocean health. Such communities could serve as testing grounds for sustainable technologies and social systems, while also providing alternatives to increasingly crowded coastal areas. Space exploration and the search for life on other planets has renewed appreciation for Earth's oceans as unique and precious environments. The discovery of subsurface oceans on moons like Europa and Enceladus has highlighted how rare and special liquid water environments may be in the universe. This cosmic perspective on Earth's oceans could strengthen human motivation for protecting and preserving marine environments as irreplaceable components of our planetary heritage. Future generations may develop new forms of relationship with ocean environments that we cannot currently imagine. Just as contemporary scuba diving, surfing, and whale watching would have been inconceivable to earlier generations, these new relationships will likely combine technological innovation with evolving cultural values and environmental awareness, creating possibilities for human-ocean interaction that are both more intensive and more sustainable than current practices. The ethical dimensions of human relationships with ocean environments will likely become increasingly important. As our understanding of marine ecosystems and their intrinsic value continues to develop, this may lead to new legal and philosophical frameworks that recognize the rights of marine ecosystems and species, creating new responsibilities for human behavior, while also opening new possibilities for cooperative relationships between human and marine communities. Ultimately, the continuing call of the ocean reflects something fundamental about human nature and our place in the natural world. We are drawn to the sea not just for practical benefits, but because it represents mystery, beauty, and connection with forces larger than ourselves. Learning to answer this call in ways that honor both human needs and oceanic integrity may be one of the defining challenges and opportunities of the coming century. The future of human-ocean relationships will depend on our ability to combine ancient wisdom about living with the sea with new knowledge about marine ecosystems and new technologies for sustainable interaction with oceanic environments. As our long journey through the depths of human relationship with the sea draws toward its close, we find ourselves back where we began, standing at the edge of the infinite, listening to the eternal conversation between wave and shore. Yet we return changed, carrying with us the stories and insights we have gathered along the way. understanding more deeply the profound connections that bind humanity to the waters that cover our blue planet. We have traveled through time and across oceans, witnessing the first tentative steps our ancestors took into coastal waters, watching as they learned to read tides and seasons, to build boats and navigate by stars. We have seen how the sea became humanity's first highway, carrying Phoenician traders across the Mediterranean, Viking explorers to distant shores, and European navigators around the world. We have explored the cultural depths where the ocean lives in human imagination, in myths of sea gods and creation stories, in art that captures the play of light on water, in music that echoes the rhythm of waves. We have walked through the living cities that grew at the intersection of land and sea, from Venice's impossible beauty, rising from lagoon waters to the cosmopolitan ports where cultures blended and new forms of human community emerged. We have witnessed both the magnificence of human achievement on the ocean and the devastating consequences of treating the sea as an inexhaustible resource to be exploited without regard for consequence. Through it all, one truth has remained constant. The relationship between humanity and the sea is not a simple story of conquest or domination, but a complex dance of dependence and adaptation, of learning and forgetting, of wisdom gained and sometimes lost. The ocean has shaped us as surely as we have tried to shape it, teaching us patience and humility, inspiring our greatest art, and supporting our most basic needs. Tonight, as we stand once again at the water's edge, we understand that this relationship will continue to evolve. The challenges facing both human communities and marine ecosystems are unprecedented in their scope and urgency. Climate change, pollution, and overexploitation threaten the health of oceanic systems that have supported life for billions of years. Yet within these challenges lie opportunities for new forms of relationship, new ways of understanding our dependence on the sea, new possibilities for living in harmony with oceanic rhythms. The young people who will inherit these challenges also inherit the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who have made their lives beside the sea. They carry forward the navigation skills of Polynesian wayfinders, the ecological knowledge of traditional fishing communities, the artistic vision of those who have found beauty in the ocean's endless forms. To this ancient wisdom, they add new tools and new understanding, satellite technology that can monitor ocean health, genetic techniques that reveal the hidden connections of marine life, renewable energy systems that can harness the ocean's power without depleting its resources. Perhaps most importantly, they inherit a growing recognition that human welfare and ocean health are inextricably connected. The sea that provides the oxygen in every second breath we take, that regulates the climate that makes terrestrial life possible, that has inspired humanity's greatest spiritual and artistic achievements. This same sea depends on human choices. For its future health, we've become, whether we sought the role or not, as the guardians of the waters that guard us. As you drift towards sleep tonight, listening perhaps to the distant sound of waves or simply imagining their eternal rhythm, carry with you the understanding that you are part of this ancient relationship. Your choices about how you live, what you consume, how you treat the waters that flow through your life, these choices ripple outward like waves from a dropped stone, connecting you to coral reefs in distant oceans, to fishing communities you will never visit, to marine creatures whose names you may never know. The ocean asks nothing of us but understanding, offers us everything from the humblest tide pool creature to the grandest whale. In its vastness, we find perspective on our own small lives. In its power, we discover humility. In its beauty, we recognize something worthy of protection. Rhythms, we hear the heartbeat of the planet that is our only home. So, let the waves carry away the worries of the day as you settle into rest. Let the tide of sleep wash over you gently, as it has countless millions before you and will countless millions after. Dream, if you will, of clean oceans and abundant reefs, of coastal communities that thrive in harmony with marine ecosystems, of children who grow up understanding that they belong to the sea as much as the sea belongs to them. The ocean's call that has echoed through human history will continue long after we are gone, summoning future generations to explore its mysteries, to learn from its wisdom, to find in its depths both challenge and solace. May they find the waters cleaner than we leave them, the marine life more abundant, the relationship between human and oceanic communities more harmonious than we have achieved. And may you, tonight and in all your tomorrows, carry within you the peace that comes from understanding your place in the vast web of life that connects mountain watersheds to ocean depths, connects the rain that falls on your roof to the whale that sings in distant seas, connects your breathing to the breath. Of the world, the tide turns, as it always has and always will. The waves continue their eternal conversation with the shore. And somewhere in that rhythm, ancient and infinitely patient, humanity continues to learn what it means to live on a water planet, surrounded by the sea that is our origin, our sustenance, and our destination. Good night. May the ocean's eternal rhythms carry you gently into sleep, and may you wake with a deeper understanding of the blue world that surrounds and sustains us all.